son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, it's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. We're back here again. We have the esteemed pleasure of being joined by Izzo and Magnum of the Swerve Podcast. And I am just so excited to get into this topic. We're going to be talking about DARPA, one of the most shadowy organizations in the lexicon of military establishments. But before we do that, I just want to take a quick second to kind of tell the story of how I end up meeting you guys. I saw you run an ad on Podcorn.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Interesting.
I read the description and I was like, you know what? There's no way. I don't even give a shit if Podcorn pays me for this. I want to check out this podcast. And I was immediately sucked in. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Izzo and Magnum from the Swerve Podcast.
What's up, everybody? We're here.
Could you guys just, for the sake of my audience, give like a quick breakdown of what Swerve is and who you guys are?
Absolutely. So, my alias is Magnum. I am a co-host of the Swerve Podcast along with Izzo, and our premise is very simple. We do deep research on topics that swerve off the mainstream path, and then we just like talking about crazy shit. That's basically our premise. Very similar to what you're doing here, James.
Almost the same thing, yeah.
Yes.
Except way better research. Sure.
That's where we try to emphasize. We love going into the depth of the fringe topics, kind of finding these strange corners, and that's really what I like to do. And Izzo, you can speak for yourself. What's up with you?
I just like learning about weird topics all the time. So the more knowledge I have, I just feel better knowing things. You never know when you're in a conversation with somebody and they bring something up, and you're just like, actually, I know a little bit about that. So that's kind of my whole thing here, is just trying to learn as much stuff as I can and things that people don't want you to know. So like we said, off the mainstream path. And no, it's been really enjoyable, and I don't know, I really like it. So
now I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we started during COVID, and I think there was one of two things that people did during COVID. They either got a dog or they started a podcast. And yeah, we started a podcast.
That's painfully accurate, yeah.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question, but the caveat there is, were you guys like this before you started the podcast? Were you like the people at the party where they're like, shut up, we're just trying to have fun, we don't want to hear about this shit?
You know, I think we've slowly, I'll speak for myself, slowly but surely been converted more and more swervy and fringe since we started. We like to emphasize listener requests. So often, I would say in the range of 70 to 80% of the topics we cover, they are coming from listener requests. It's not even off the top of our head. So they're kind of directing what we're researching. And when we go through these steps, going deeper and deeper into certain things, sometimes you're like, oh, there actually is something here. You know what I mean? And then it changes how you think about things, for sure. For me, personally.
That's a pretty awesome level of chaos to the podcast.
Yes.
Like you don't even know what you're going to be researching.
Yes, exactly.
What is the weirdest? And I'm just going to pop this up on the screen for folks so they can see the show. There we go. That's what I want. Follow them. This is the page. All these links will, of course, be in the description. You've got a ton of amazing episodes, great topics. Like we said, super well researched. What is, of all of these things, because it really is a wide scope of areas of focus, what's the weirdest to you guys?
I'll let Izzo speak to his first, then I'll give mine.
That's a good question. The weirdest one, probably, I'll do like a recent example. Maybe it's like recency bias, but probably the Kozrev time mirrors. That one, just like didn't know anything about it, started researching it, and things started to make sense. It also became like a popular episode, so people resonated with it as well. So that one was weird, but we've definitely done a lot of topics, and it's hard to pick just like the weirdest one. They all have
strange.
they all are pretty strange. But no, I like doing the research on like these theories that could be rooted in science. So that's kind of what interests me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would dovetail off that. I love when we have requests that I can go into scientific papers and actually deep dive into kind of
Tangible
primary
details.
sources.
Yeah.
Yes, I really appreciate those. So among those, the one that got me the most, putting conspiracy tinfoil hat on, was when we did anti-gravity. I went into that with not knowing really anything, and we did this story on a guy named Thomas Townsend Brown, and that was very, very interesting to me. That was one where by the end of that research, I would say, I'm probably like 95, maybe 90% certain, certain's maybe too strong a word, that there is anti-gravity tech that's known. And I know that sounds crazy and very out there, but after I did that research, that really, really stuck with me, that one particular. Because often when you get into these topics, and James, I'm sure you can relate to this, you go down these rabbit holes, you'll go into the depths, and often a lot of the topics, they turn out to be somewhat debunked or easily debunked. And this was one among a plethora of topics that it was not easy to debunk. In fact, I came on the other side of it believing it for the most part.
The Townsend Brown angle or portion of this conversation is interesting because I had heard the name, but I was not aware at all of the context. And the first like real explosion I saw that was American Alchemy. Jesse Michaels did a thing that was great. But one thing I really love, again, about your podcast is I personally, I will entertain any shit. Okay, doesn't matter how fringe it is. I'll just entertain it just to say that here's a possibility, right? But as I've gotten older, I appreciate the fucking text, tangible, somebody who is a qualified scientist, like writing actual scientific words about it.
Yeah.
Because, with many of these things, it's like there's tons of circumstantial scenarios, but there's very little hard, tangible shit to say this is what it is.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's what attracts many people to this. I think a lot of innovation and great ideas, they do originate on the fringe.
They have to. Yes. The mainstream isn't for advances and trying cutting edge. The reason it's called cutting edge or bleeding edge is exactly that reason.
Yeah, I mean, even special relativity, Einstein, that was fringe. That was hard for people to accept for a long time, and then all of a sudden it was accepted. Tectonic plates, too. That was fringe. The idea that we have molten core in the Earth, that was fringe, and now it's established science.
Yeah, there's definitely a piece of me that thinks it's just always important I want to hear both sides of a story, right?
Absolutely.
I want to hear what everybody thinks about it and then try and make up my own decision about where's the overlap? What are the things that are reoccurring and verifiable? But so many of these things are just not that way, and I find sometimes even on my show, I'm just telling people all the different possibilities. Like there's very few things I believe in.
Yes.
There's very few things I'm like, this is for sure the way it is.
Yes.
But I'll be happy to present all the different avenues. Townsend Brown, there's just a lot of tangible avenues. There's a lot of like heavy documentation. That's one thing I loved about your episode, is that it just went into a little more granular detail than American Alchemy could in their time constraints. So, again, to listeners, cannot recommend their show enough. It's a Swerve Podcast. Links will be in there. What do you guys like? What is your goal with this? Like, what is the utopian scenario?
Well, for me personally, I'll let Izzo speak to what he gets out of the podcast. For me, it's a great excuse to dive into these topics and present them to other people. So I would be reading crazy shit like this anyways. You know what I mean?
Might as well do something with it.
So I might as well present it, package it, write it out, refine my thoughts on it, and you get a better grasp of things, and you get a better grasp of what is false and what is true, or what is closer to truth than not. And that's big. The Townsend Brown example is a great one, because I'm not saying 100% that this is true like you're saying. You're kind of presenting both possibilities, and I find like I get that with the podcast. I can dive into things and see which side of the fence they land on, or where it skews, where the data skews more. Is it more false? Is it more true? And I do enjoy that.
Yeah, and I would say for myself, again, like that piece on gaining the knowledge. But then the other thing with the podcast itself is just being able to create something and get better over time with it. Mm-hmm. So putting in that effort and time and putting something out there, even if, sometimes it doesn't get the views or whatever, you just create something that you're passionate about, you put it out there, and then you just get better. And that's the process that I like, is that creative process of actually putting it together, and then just always getting a little bit better, having those tools in your, like, on your belt of like editing audio, researching things, marketing shows, just that whole piece of the back end of the podcast.
So you really love the logistics.
Yeah, and then just doing it because I feel like we live in this era where there's a lot of content being created, and I just want it to be a part of it. So, yeah,
it really, we're the experiment, and we'll kind of touch on that when we go over this shit. But like, we're the experiment, and there's an amazing documentary that I would recommend. I've recommended it a million times on this show. It's called "We Live in Public."
Okay,
and both of you would really dig it. Anyways, it's about this guy who was a first wave tech entrepreneur in the original internet bubble, and he made just this insane amount of money, and he wanted to conduct social experiments. And some of the social experiments that he conducted, well, the most poignant one, the one that the documentary is about, he bought a building in New York, and he let 100 people live in there. He gave them food, drugs, a place to sleep, all these like very strange amenities. He had a firing range in there, like you could shoot whatever gun you want.
That's crazy.
He had a CIA interrogator who would like press you. They'd put you in an interrogation room, and you'd get grilled by a CIA interrogator.
Okay.
And he let all different types of people in, business people, artists, drug addicts, like just like a complete mix match of 100 random people. The only catch is he filmed everything, and he owned it.
Okay.
So this was like early, I guess late 90s, mid to late 90s, precursor to social media. And when this movie came out in like 2008, and 2008, we were like, Jesus Christ, this is pretty close. We're already there. We definitely have crossed the line, and when you guys watch it, you'll know exactly what I'm saying.
I'll have to check it out. What was the title of that again?
It's called We Live in Public. I will also, I'm going to, just for the sake of the people who are watching, I'm going to bring this up to We Live in Public. This is the documentary right here, and this link will be in the description. It's an incredible documentary.
Excellent.
Like, as time has gone by, it becomes more poignant every year. It's like, Jesus Christ, we're in the illusion.
Yeah.
My other question regarding the podcast and regarding these topics in general is like, what is the first conspiracy that got you guys into conspiracies?
Oh, man. What? Well, you see, here, I've always kind of been tangential to the conspiracy stuff. So let me think. It must have been something with 9/11. There was always a little strangeness with that. I remember a long time ago, what was it, Loose Change or something?
Mm-hmm.
That might have been
was another
Zeitgeist. Yeah. That might have been my first exposure to these types of documentaries. But I kind of moved away from that for a long time until we actually started the podcast. But now I'm back. I'm back, baby.
Back, baby. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably say like the 9/11 conspiracy stuff was my first introduction to conspiracy. And then from that moment on, or once I was old enough to understand it, I guess. Yeah, it was being hooked, but also starting to question things around me and question the media. And then as things come up, like, I don't know, I'll use an example like Coney 2012. Everyone was like, oh, we got to like support this cause. And I'm like, I don't even understand it. And what if we're being fed a lie? So I just started questioning everything from that point forward and just got hooked on conspiracies.
Well, we're living in like the age, everything's a fucking conspiracy.
Yeah.
9/11 is a good point. 9/11 is our JFK. My dad is not a conspiracy person, but basically everyone in his generation accepts that JFK got killed by the CIA. That
right.
Whatever story we got told was not exactly what happened. And for us, our generations, every year has been some shit like that. Mm-hmm. Every year, even going back to 9/11. So I would say it was definitely that, and there was for sure in the Kazaa and LimeWire era, Napster era, there was a video of an alien interrogation. It's the one with like the DNI timestamp in the bottom left corner.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
You guys may have seen it. There's a documentarian who's a little out there in terms of like the alien space, but his name's Jon Stewart. He's working on a documentary supposing that was a real video and that was an actual extra,
interesting,
terrestrial biological entity or whatever. But those two things for sure. I always knew something was weird. I never understood why we went to Iraq.
Oh,
I just
well,
never.
We should tell you, James. We're actually from Canada. We're Canada based.
Oh no, I know.
Okay.
I know. So I don't mean we by you guys. Okay. I mean we by my country.
Right.
At that point I lived in Nebraska. It was in 8th grade. The school stopped. It was a horrifying experience, even in landlocked, geographically isolated Nebraska. And I think they even, on the news, they were saying that Bush flew out to Offutt, which is the Air Force Base in Omaha. So everyone was like, great, now they're going to nuke us. We didn't have any skin in this game, and now they're going to fucking nuke us. Cool.
Yeah.
So tensions were high. But I just knew something was wrong, and I knew something was wrong when we went into Iraq. I was just like, this doesn't sound right at all. And then, of course, since then we found out that there were no weapons of mass destruction. I guess the point of what I'm saying is it's like, I think it's funny that most people in our generation are willing to entertain these conversations way more than they were even 10 years ago because there's so many of them happening on a daily basis in our lifetimes.
I think you're correct in stating that. I think, it's the general conversation, even of the mainstream, is skewed more to what you are saying. More suspicious, I would say. I would definitely agree with that.
And I don't know what the propaganda is like in Canada, but in here it's gotten to a point where like I'm completely checked out. I feel like everything that me and my fellow citizens are being subjected to is just a ploy to get us to behave a certain way. And looking into these topics doesn't make one feel less that way. It's not super long before you get down like an MK Ultra rabbit hole or a PSYOP rabbit hole, and then you start questioning like what in the time of fake news, what is truth? Where do we find truth?
Absolutely. The reason I laugh is when you say that, I'm like, this is Canada. We have state-sponsored media, so it's
pretty bad.
The propaganda is quite literally sponsored by our government, so
cool. You gotta love it. We have no choice. This is kind of I was laughing before we got started, just thinking about what we have in store here. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the right to bear arms that Americans have and how they like to exercise it. And one of my favorite things, kind of diverting the conversation to DARPA here, is that this organization creates the tools that make assault rifles irrelevant. There's so many people in America, especially right now, there's like this weird, some people in this country want a civil war. Like they actually want it. And the tensions are high here. I'm sure you've seen stuff on the news, but shit is just, it's tense here right now.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of stuff. You guys had that border crisis in Texas for a bit between federal, state. I've heard through the grapevine a couple things here and there.
School shootings. It's been ridiculous. But there's like a small cadre of people in this country that they're like hoping for civil war. And I always laugh because it makes me think of DARPA and the robots and the drones. And that's like usually my first question to them is like, do you have Reaper drones? Great. You have a fleet of Reaper drones? Because that's what it's going to take to fight an oppressive government now. Like you're completely outgunned. We're well past muskets. We've laid the groundwork here and we've kind of navigated here. Let's go ahead and dig in. We're going to talk today, folks, about one of the strangest institutions attached to the military and intelligence agencies, DARPA.
Oh, here we go. Got the soundboard. Yeah.
So for those who are interested in these subjects, there are a number of books that were written by Annie Jacobson. Most specifically, I'm going to pull this one up so people can see. It's Pentagon's Brain. And if you're not familiar with Annie Jacobson or her work, she's written a ton of great books. You see them up here. There's an Area 51, Surprise, Kill, Vanish, which is also super fucked. And I'm pretty sure she has a really good book, like kind of a definitive book about Paperclip, Operation Paperclip. But for the listeners, I have kind of put together a decent little summary of the history that's kind of based on Annie Jacobson's lectures. And she does a really good job of succinctly condensing 60 years of history into an ingestible amount of information. All of those links, again, will be at the bottom.
She's got a great voice, too.
She really does. She really does. She's got she's got epic episodes on a bunch of different podcasts. Highly recommend it. The funniest thing about this to me, DARPA is like this super secretive organization working on all this classified stuff, but they have a cute little YouTube page. Okay? And it's actually really good. They've got some lectures on here. They've got a couple of very low resolution videos about the history of DARPA. But this is like a really well fleshed out YouTube page. If you're interested in it, just folks, go to the source. You will not be disappointed. So DARPA, we'll get to what DARPA, the name, means here in a second. But the funniest thing to me about this as an organization is that it really doesn't have that many people. And my favorite part about it is it's kind of like the asymmetric responses to war. You know what I mean? So when the intelligence agencies, when the military needs some unconventional solution to an unconventional problem, they call in DARPA. It's got about 200 employees. Its annual budget is about $3 billion. It's very small, but it is the answer to a lot of the strangest and toughest questions from military and intelligence.
Yes.
And we'll kind of get into all the different things that they've had a part in right now. But first, it's important for us to mention John von Neumann. And I'll bring him up here too. This guy is basically a legendary scientist that advised the government on a number of different things. He was referred to as a human computer. And he was personally responsible for calculating things like the ideal height for the detonation of the atom bomb to ensure the highest kill rate.
Yeah, what a fun calculation to make, eh?
seriously. I guess he did it with joy. There's also probably a current of that in some of the stuff that you guys got into. Like some of this stuff is it's like that scene. You guys watched that show Silicon Valley?
I haven't.
Okay, there's this ridiculous scene where they're at this convention and they need to fix this problem, and they end up getting caught discussing like what would be the most effective way for everyone in the audience to circle jerk themselves. But like they're doing like hard math, like it's all over the walls, and they're like really trying to do the equations because they're all computer programmers.
Nice.
It makes me think of that in the sense that they would come into a room at DARPA and be like, how do we kill the most people? And then a bunch of the smartest scientists in the world would just be like, I've got an idea. Here, wait. Maybe if we did this instead.
Yeah, ground detonation's not nearly as effective. It's a high altitude, and it's like, what?
It's just there's this funny element about the government, I guess, the American government especially. But he was instrumental in developing one of the first machine computers at the time when computers were as big as a house. It was called Maniac 1, and that's an acronym for Mathematical Analyzer, Numerical Integrator, and Computer. And I'll pull up a picture of that. This thing was a monster. But this guy, John von Neumann, is effectively DARPA before DARPA.
Right.
He referred to a computer software as its organs, and he dies a year before the foundation of DARPA. But basically, his death is what makes all the military people, all the big generals, be like, we need somebody, we need something like this. A network of scientists working on these things at all times. And effectively, DARPA is created to address the problems associated with science creating the atom bomb, a weapon for which there is no defense. There was no defense back then, and there still is no defense. Mm-hmm. With that, they also wanted to establish something called command and control, or C2, and effectively evolve the military response into the atomic age. A lot of the first initial like outcry for people to be looking into these, in the military to be looking into these options is Sputnik. Now it's not a thing for us, but back then nobody was in space, and Russia getting Sputnik in space, like that really disturbed a lot of Americans because they lost the space race. Darn it.
Yeah.
And they were sour about it, but then there was like this real serious idea. And Sputnik, I'll pull up a picture of Sputnik here because it's fucking hilarious. But Sputnik, it is the smallest looking fucking thing. It's like this tiny little ball with some antennae sticking off of it. And that went up in the air, and Americans were convinced that they were going to be launching nukes. Russia was going to be from Sputnik. Like that's how ridiculous. But it was really just because they were so sour from losing the space race. It's just delightfully petty. But that was a pivotal moment for U.S. military-industrial complex because they refused to ever be beaten again. And not to wave the flag or anything, but we're still up. We're still up. We got the money, or do we? I don't know. Do we? But we sure spend it.
Yeah.
So anyways, there's a couple other pivotal people that are like important to this portion of the conversation, and that's Ernest Lawrence. I'm going to pop him up here, share this screen. Oh no, that is so meta.
Oh, fractals.
Sick, dude. Let's try this again. There we go. Good old Ernie. Ernest Lawrence and Edward Teller co-founded Lawrence Livermore National Labs. Here's Edward Teller. This is like the very infancy. This isn't DARPA. This isn't any formal arrangement. Military says, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Like, assemble the team. And these guys put together Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Then another individual, Herb York, serves as the lab's first director. And basically this transitions him into 1958, becoming the scientific advisor of ARPA, which stands for, now we're going to get to it, the Advanced Research Project Agency, and ultimately gets renamed DARPA with adding defense in front of it. JFK and LBJ both personally authorized some of the most controversial ARPA weapons programs of Vietnam, eventually leading to LBJ going to the South Vietnamese president in 1961 and asking him to sign off on building an ARPA weapons facility in Saigon to help solve the problem of Vietnam. But this was like this, yeah. And I don't know how far either of you have dug into LBJ, but that character is colorful.
Not far enough, no.
Yeah, that's not only with like the JFK assassination stuff, it's just him as an individual. He was rather unsavory. But I guess we had already gone through, or were about to go through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like tensions were real high everywhere. Still kind of from Sputnik, but just this is the real fun part of the Cold War that gets going, and everyone's just on edge that there's going to be some nuke shit. Not necessarily in Vietnam, but the whole reason I'm saying that is because even people who would normally be unwilling to entertain some of this unsavory options they end up choosing, we were willing to try anything. And we were trying to use all of these guys that we had assembled to come up with these very interesting asymmetric responses to whatever we knew as war at that time. One of the examples of that would be Project Agile. And I will again pull this link up here. Nope, that's not what I want. Oh, that's the wrong link. Never mind. Okay, so I won't be pulling that one up. But anyways, it was comprised of a number of sub-projects, one of which was geared toward making a more compact semi-automatic weapon, which would be easier for the South Vietnamese soldiers to use. So in 1966, ARPA helps develop the AR-15 rifle into a fully automatic version known as the M16, and the M16 is still like standard issue in American military.
Interesting.
So that this at this point, they're not doing any real fringe stuff. Mm-hmm. What they're doing is finding simple solutions to very complex problems that can be implemented with some expediency. That's a really good example. That gun is still, again, like you enlist in the American military, you're going to get an M16.
Isn't it kind of strange that, that's almost, how long ago is that at this point? Is that almost 60 years-ish?
Easy, yeah.
And there hasn't been any innovation on an M16?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's, well, I'm sure there have been updates, but by and large, it's the same weapon. There has been no other weapon that has emerged to be the supreme thing. Now, that also plays into the idea that we're getting away from like ballistic weapons, and everything's gonna be drone,
more automated.
A human won't need to shoot a gun because a human is inaccurate.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if this is a DARPA thing, but smart bullets. I don't know if you've seen.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar.
So
yeah,
the idea that a human would be shooting a gun is going to quickly become outdated, and at least from my view of just looking into this stuff alone, it's like clearly they're doubling down on robots and
which we'll cover towards the end of this podcast for sure. Definitely.
So that's the super exciting stuff.
Yes.
This is more just kind of context for everybody. I've heard the word DARPA referenced a ton, but didn't realize it was responsible for all the things that it was responsible for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do want to say also, like DARPA, they have a great naming person or guy, because all these like project names and the abbreviations for things, they're really nice, like Maniac, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of them, but even like Project Agile, it's like, now you can be more agile because of just automatic.
Honestly, that must be super fun to come up with a name for a project.
Yeah, just
like
a branding person.
Some crazy cutting edge thing. You're like, all right, we're naming this after a small woodland creature.
Yeah.
Another hilarious example of something they developed at this time under this program was the chemical defoliant Agent Orange. And that was used extensively throughout the war with reckless disregard for the long-term effect on the Vietnamese people and the nature there. But again, this was a point where we were trying to come up with the most... No idea was a bad idea. There's a ton of scientists with a ton of money and a bunch of generals saying we need shit to kill. We need to be supreme. You know, I'm sure somewhere along the lines there were Operation Paperclip guys that we got that were assisting on these projects. I don't know if I have any specific examples of that, but it would not surprise me if there was some overlap. Anyways, technology at this time is super rudimentary. It's not the fancy technology that we have now. It's large. Everything takes space. We saw the picture of the Maniac computer. That was a building. It took up a building. It wasn't just a rack. You know, this for the less computing power than we have in our phones right now. So there's another really important person that comes into play, and it's this guy with a very interesting last name.
Oh, God.
JCR Licklighter.
Okay. Okay.
Nope. There we go. And he's... You know what's funny about this? Before I show this, he looks exactly like you think he's going to look.
Yes.
Like you hear that name and you're like, I think I know what that guy looks like. Here he is.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Exactly.
Love it.
What you were envisioning in your head. Just look at how big his forehead is.
I love it.
Yeah,
Like you see how... That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a big brain in there for sure. This guy is who many people consider to be the real father of the internet. He joined DARPA and really doubled down on the vision of a partnership between humans and technology. And at the time, people said he was crazy, but so many of his things started to really pay off in big ways that we're at where we're at now. He had an idea, a flippant idea, to develop an intergalactic computer network, the early iterations of which were referred to as ARPANET, but later become the internet that we're using right now. Thanks, Licklighter.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
You did it, man.
It's interesting. The early internet, it's funny. They actually were sending it. It was a way to send data packets between physicists. They were using it to send information between the physics laboratories across large gaps of space. So it's kind of cool. That's where it all starts. And then we get this cool thing where I can use my phone anywhere.
Yeah, because they wanted it to be safe from like wires being cut or bombings that occurs. Just a way to send information.
Decentralized info.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is really crazy to see what it has become now. But yeah, I mean, really, that's this. It's like this is the conundrum with this shit. Because they did this research, we have these cool things. Because they did this research, they also created Agent Orange.
Yes.
You know, it's like is the gift and the curse of the knowledge.
It's the dichotomy or the duality of almost anything, right? The nuclear weapons, well, we have nuclear reactors. We have benefits from this, great energy sources, but at the same time, you have some guy calculating the precise altitude to maximize death. So I think it's with everything, even fire, right? Fire's dope, but use it as a weapon, or you can use it to heat yourself while you're camping. So
yeah, you know, I don't know if we're gonna end up making the right decisions with all this stuff, but we will see. We will probably be alive for that, so that'll be fun. We'll get to see some of these calculations in action. You know, we missed out the first time, but we might get to see the second time.
Yeah.
So another important group kind of emerges out of this, and this group isn't necessarily founded for DARPA. but they're the Jason scientists. It's like this collection of scientists with varying degrees of expertise, and this is where this stuff gets really fun. So this is where it enters like the true asymmetry. Up until this point, these are pretty okay. They need a gun that works better for their shape and build. All right, so we'll find a way to cheaply modify one of the guns we already make a lot of. Cool, problem solved. We need a way to smoke out guys from the forest. All right, let's make a chemical agent that makes the land inhabitable. Those are pretty like straightforward military responses to military problems. Here's where it starts to get weird. So, co-founded by Marvin Leonard Goldberger, the Jason scientists were an elite group of scientists who advise on ARPA projects. And in 1966, they conceived a plan to monitor traffic on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, called McNamara's Electronic Fence, or McNamara's Line. And let me just get that link up here real quick. This was like one of the first times signals intelligence is used. It was a system of advanced sensors, for the time at least, designed to detect movement on the trail. And they used audio. They would pick up audio signal and seismic signal. So if they were moving trucks or large groups of people, combined with the audio. And here's another one that was initially ridiculed by officials at the Pentagon, but this is the beginning of the type of sensor-based warfare that we have now. DARPA is responsible for that.
Interesting.
They start putting this together. Up until this is how stupid this is. This is what I love about the military. Up until this point, the military thought it was a bad idea to monitor the main road of traffic for the enemy. They didn't think it was a good idea to monitor the main artery for traffic of your enemy.
That's weird. That seems fairly obvious that I'm not a general.
Well, this I guess this is too just like intelligence as a whole was in its infancy. Like, yeah, we had CIA,
right.
we had FBI, but they were at this point they were nothing what they are now. And it's just so funny to me. But again, asymmetric responses. Nobody was willing to entertain this idea, and once they did, it quickly took over how military engages with the battlefield. DARPA is also responsible for some of the earliest innovations in drones. The super early ones are, these look so fucking hilarious. This one's Night Panther. And
it's pretty dope for the time.
It's pretty sick, but now it looks hilarious. But
yeah,
it's crazy that they were doing this. I mean, the truck trips me out a little more because of how sensitive all this shit was. But this was made as a mobile rig, and
wow.
this is the information was gathered here and then transmitted here and then broadcast where it needed to go.
This is the route of Amazon vehicles, I think. They're going to be dropping drones, delivering packages. And they're going to be calling back DARPA, just like they invented the internet. They invented the Amazon delivery package system of the future.
This is all the stuff we see now. This is like this was the first time somebody had thought to do that and accomplish something like that. And even this, it's very sophisticated. Like this is actually very, very sophisticated, even for now. Considering what it's doing, but this is Vietnam era.
Yeah,
it's just crazy to think. Anyways, go ahead.
I think the general consensus is like DARPA has technology that's 20 to 30 years out from being like used by consumers. So it's just, even back then, like now we're starting to commercialize drones and everything. And back in the 60s, they had the idea and had a working prototype, even though it doesn't look like it does now. But yeah, they're far more advanced than what we can even think of at this point.
Well, and again, by design, the whole purpose of this thing is to think of shit that hasn't been thought.
Yeah.
That's why I find the whole institution to be as interesting as it is because they look at a problem that's been asked for a long time, and somehow they come up with an idea that nobody has, like, legitimately, that nobody has thought of before.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited.
It's
gonna be good.
And again, like, people just, you have no idea. Wait till we get into the stuff about, like, the modern shit. You have no idea the stuff that is going on in some fucking bunker somewhere right now.
Yeah.
But anyways, Night Panther and Night Gazelle, those two vehicles we just looked at, they utilized the combination of sensor technology, supercomputers again for the time, ARPANET, and even GPS. And the idea of this was to evolve command and control C2 to command control and communication C3, and ultimately building to what is referred to as network-centric warfare. Again, this is the type of warfare that we have now. For example, by the Gulf War, DARPA's JSTARS, the Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar System, and there's a very sick plane that's associated with this I want to show everybody. It was the new brain of the show. And this, like, when you see the American military if they were to deploy in war, even when they run drills, this is how shit goes. There's an eye in the sky. There's a plane up in the air that's amassing all the information and distributing out where it needs to go. And this is the plane, but Joint Stars is like the collective bodies of things that provide this information during war. But this plane is just sick.
Yeah, let's check this out.
It's a Grumman plane. It's just like a tricked out E8, and there's probably, like, this is the brain of a battle. It's weird to think, like, this is what's steering the show. It's just crazy.
It's interesting because you see the convergence between this decentralized communication system, ARPANET, which is the precursor to the internet, kind of integrating with these actual battlefield technologies, such as we just talked about, these drones. But this appears to be, is this a plane, or is this an advanced type of drone?
So this, at the time, again, this is another thing. They couldn't do this because they hadn't created an infrastructure to gather intelligence in the field and distribute it the way that we do now, where there's like multiple camera feeds, multiple sensor feeds of multiple different things. There's complete coverage in an area of operation. Everything is known that can be known about that whatever's going on in there, based on all the radars on the ships and the radars on the drones and the planes. Mm-hmm. But this JSTARS is it's not just this plane. This plane is the plane that operates as a part of Joint Stars, but it's the Surveillance Target Attack Radar System. So it's this plus a bunch of other very advanced radar shit that we have all put together. This is just the brain. This is the thing that flies in the sky. Anyways, the computing that went on in this computer, or in that plane, required 600,000 lines of code for, early 90s Gulf War times. That's pretty ridiculous. Yeah. And at this point, maybe computer technology had gotten a little bit better, so we were able to cram more in there, but it was still pretty boxy and rudimentary. We could probably do the same thing in a much smaller platform now. I'm almost certain of that. Anyway, so this is coming up into the 70s, 80s, rise of urban warfare, fall of the Berlin Wall, the increasing threat of biological attacks, of course, 9/11, and then even the simple technology that we were kind of getting rocked with on the battlefield in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, IEDs. Just simple, again, we have all this crazy, fancy, expensive shit, but a simple $10 explosive on the side of the road will incapacitate a tank.
Totally.
How do we how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so much for asymmetric weapon design. Hey, if an IED equalizes the battlefield to some extent, that's quite interesting.
Well, and you know, it's just one of those things where like there's always no one thought of that. Yeah. No one thought, well, what if people are improvising very dangerous, at least devices that are explosive enough to kill or fuck up a vehicle, an expensive vehicle. All of these things propelled DARPA into focusing on drones and robots, which is kind of where we're at today. But the first real iterations of them doubling down here, this thing is so fucking sick. This thing is called the Talon. And this is a weapon platform that can do all sorts of stuff. It has a ton of different cameras. This one has a machine gun on it, but like it can spot and kill something from 2 miles away.
Has it got an M16 on it?
Yeah, probably.
That's where the M16 advanced to, a Talon.
Yeah, exactly. Again, human doesn't need to shoot it. We'll just attach it to we have a bunch of the guns. Let's just attach it to a drone and let it do the work. But that thing, it just looks badass as hell. But this next thing is, we had a few bigger drones at this point. But there was a period of time where this thing was these individual soldiers on the battlefield. It was their best friend. And now we see like all the drone shit going on in Ukraine, but like this was the first real time that was even an opportunity. So this thing is the Wasp. It's still in use. This is the Wasp 3. Obviously started with 1 and 2, but you see the guy throwing it here. That's how you deploy him. So it could fit in your backpack, and you'd be in the battlefield, and you'd throw the thing up in the air. You'd scan it with all the different sensors, see what you see, and then go about your day. But it could fit in your backpack.
Wow.
And I guess this one, it was first designed by AeroVironment Inc. and was first added to the Air Force inventory in 2007. It's cool. Just a cool little device. And then that thing can gather in real time video, and they can even swarm. So if you have a bunch of them, they can work in cahoots. The next thing is, oh my bad. This is the thing that can kill you from 2 miles away. Excuse me. It's kind of the same situation, but this one's meant for death.
Is that with smart bullets then that it's able to do this, or?
No. See, with this, you have to imagine when a human is shooting a gun, we're breathing, we're moving, we can only do so much. When that robot stops, it's not moving. It's completely still. And it's got a bunch of lasers on there that'll range and scope whatever shot it needs to shoot, and shoot it with little to no recoil, like perfect dead accuracy every time.
Well, it's a modern R2-D2. That's
what
it looks like.
It's kind of, much more lethal R2-D2. Now, I don't know if people specifically drive this, or if this is like a completely automated or unmanned situation. There it is. Is an unmanned ground vehicle. There you go.
Wow.
So, anyways, that thing's fucking sick, and it can kill a human target from 2 miles away, has motion detectors, acoustic sensors, siren and speaker systems, non-lethal lasers, and lethal grenades, and encrypted technology. Some police forces have these, but they're typically used for bomb, like sussing out bomb. They don't have them with guns and grenade launchers attached. But that thing is badass.
Yeah.
It's super cool. I'd love to get killed by that.
If you're gonna go out, right? Go out with a bang.
Why not? And then of course, I'm sure as many people have seen, Boston Dynamics gets a lot of these DARPA contracts. They're the most recognizable in terms of the shit that they've created. I didn't even know they had this thing, which is the Atlas, and it's a humanoid robot. Mm-hmm. This is different than the other Boston Dynamics robots I was familiar with. This is a much more like this is what they used to be. They've evolved to this now, which again, like this would have been maybe early 2000s. What you're seeing is an increased body for battery pack and computing power, which can now all fit in. It's crazy. The battery technology especially has gotten so ridiculous. And I can only imagine what kind of shit they have going on in terms of advanced or exotic energy storage. Mm-hmm. But then people might also be familiar with this thing, which is the L3. And again, just loaded with sensors, tons of computing power. You're not driving this. You load a bunch of gear on this, and it follows you. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole here, but there's definitely been conversations at some point where people are talking about, using these as, and I'm pretty sure they already are in some form used as battlefield support. And it's crazy. Like the same way you can have your commercial drone follow you, like your DJI or whatever. Mm-hmm. You've got an RFID thing on you that the thing can sense, and it's just following you. You're maybe controlling it with a simple graphical interface.
Yeah.
It's crazy just how deploy. And I mean, again, Boston Dynamics has been building those two things, the L3 and Atlas, for a long, long time.
Absolutely. I always feel bad for those legged systems when they show the videos of them kicking it over and it just like stumbles.
They really do get abused.
It's so funny.
They really do get abused. I mean, I remember when those videos first started coming out, people were like, those things are dumb. They'll never be able to.
Yeah.
We'll never use those on the battlefield. They'll never be able to be a usable thing. And yet here we are. So the last point that I want to touch on, and it's important because we're rapidly approaching the singularity here. It's supercomputer stuff. So there is a very famous computer that they made with IBM. It's called the Roadrunner supercomputer. This was another one that was massive in scale, but not in any way comparable in terms of processing power. This is infinitely more powerful than the Maniac or any of the first iterations of computers they had. This is like a supercomputer, built for the purposes of being a supercomputer. It was built for Los Alamos Labs, as many of you will be familiar with all the strange things that they are associated with. And in 2008, it was the fastest computer in the world. And then ultimately advances in chip technology rendered it obsolete. And then part of what remained of this computer in 2014 was used to power DARPA's artificial intelligence project.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure whatever the capabilities of this Roadrunner supercomputer were, they are far outpaced with whatever is available now. In fact, I know with the whole AI revolution we're kind of having, there's talk at many of these corporations of building their own nuclear power facilities to power, just to power the computers and the computation that is needed to put their products out and advance them. So and I can't imagine what DARPA's at.
Well, for sure. I don't necessarily think they've got like operating quantum computers in there or anything. They may, but I don't think it is that. I still think it is like really, until there's some like absolutely verifiable big development in quantum computing. I don't think it's going to even be available to them. They're just but yeah, whatever. In 2008, by 2014, they were already parsing it out, which means they had something else to take its place that was, twice or whatever Kurzweil's theorem is, the exponential rise in technology, twice, 4 times as powerful as whatever that was. But this, I think, again, like the most sobering part about most of going through that is I never learned about any of it. No one ever taught me that in school. No one ever mentioned those things. For as much as we use the internet, I didn't know the true context or anything about Licklider, who's like, again, the father of the internet. That's a good point. These people do this stuff. They commit their whole lives, their whole career and nobody hears about them. You might not, you probably won't hear about them. You're definitely not going to hear about the shit they did.
Yeah.
Until, well after they're dead. At least that seems to be the trend with a lot of the stuff that, everyone associated with the program dies, and then the stuff can start to get declassified because nobody could get in trouble or whatever.
Right.
But, they were absolutely pushing late 1990s, early 2000s technology. The first iterations of that were in the mid 60s. So 35 years is pretty good.
No, it's mind-boggling how it is. It's mind-boggling. The drones for me is a very great example. Late 60s, they have functioning drones, and drones are just becoming immersed in the cultural zeitgeist now as far as consumer products. It's
all thanks to DARPA.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks.
Totally.
You know what? It's time that we get into the real goofy shit here.
I think so.
Because now I'm going to turn you guys loose, and we're going to talk. This is all just a bit of context to understand how we get to where we're at now. And if you think you're familiar with what we have in our arsenal, you're about to have your mind melted, because they're doing some shit that, again, no one is even thinking of.
Absolutely. And I will say, a lot of the stuff we're going to go through next, I would assume that this is already mostly obsolete in some sense, because if this is what is being shown and this is what we can find publicly, I'm certain that, yeah, totally.
They're well beyond this. They're on to something new.
So, James, I think you did a great job summing up where DARPA started, the history of it, kind of setting the stage for where things are now. So what we're going to do next, myself and Izzo, we're going to go through some of the most crazy fucking shit we could find about DARPA and the technologies they're putting together. But before we go into those sections, I wanted to just give a quick rundown to your audience on how DARPA actually goes about funding these things and how it goes about scoping out the latest trends and funding these and finding these fringe technologies like you were suggesting and turning them into military application. And it's pretty simple. At the end of the day, they fund projects in very simple ways, but I want to say what their mission statement is before we get into how they fund these things. They have 3 mission statements that I could find in sayings, and they use them in different websites, different PowerPoints, things like this. They interchange these. But the first one is pivotal early investment that changes what's possible. That makes a lot of sense, right? That's kind of everything you just talked about. The second is breakthrough technologies and capabilities for national security. Very obvious, defense is in their name. And 3, create breakthrough paradigm shifting solutions. And I think that one is where we're going to spend a lot of time when we go through the different projects they have. But how they set this up, how they actually go about funding projects and finding where the cutting edge science is, they have what are called program managers. And these program managers, they serve 2 to 4 year terms with the goal of identifying different research areas that could be applicable to DARPA initiatives. These, essentially what can happen, researchers from different labs across the United States or wherever, it doesn't need to be based in the United States. I know Canada, sometimes we get DARPA funding for various stuff, but they can submit proposals to these program managers and they can receive DARPA funding or be contracted by DARPA. So the program managers specifically, these 2 to 4 year terms are important because they want to maintain about a 25% churn rate every year. And the reason for this is so that you constantly have new people, fresh blood, and new ideas. So again, DARPA, you can see with the mission statements that we just said, this is why they're so innovative. They've set up systems so that they can constantly find the new ideas. these program managers also, these are not just your everyday person. These are usually high-level people in their field. They have PhDs. They're leaders in different fields of study. DARPA will hire them to be program managers, and then because these people are experts in their field, when people are submitting proposals for funding to them, they can actually understand and they can help direct the different goals that DARPA has for whatever the initiatives they might have. Now, there's an interesting term. I don't know if you guys heard about this before, but hey, did you hear the term disruptioneering? This is a DARPA term, and
they're making up words now?
Yeah, they're making up words. But it's a dope word, and basically they're looking for research areas that are going to be highly disruptive and innovative. And what's crazy about this disruptioneering approach by DARPA, once they find a new lead, so let's say you have some obscure scientist, let's use Canada as an example, somewhere in Saskatchewan, someone submits a proposal to DARPA and they're like, hey, I want funding because I'm studying fungus or whatever. And DARPA's like, I like your fungus. We're going to fund you. They go from the idea to the program in just 90 days.
Oh my God.
Maybe that doesn't sound that fast. It's about 3 months. But going from idea to an entire scientific program in 90 days is pretty ridiculous.
Well, especially when you think about the programs.
Yes. So funding is actually not as crazy as you might think. It's still pretty out there, but for a typical program that's getting funded from one of these program managers, I found numbers in the range of about 500,000 USD to $1 million USD for a new program. So say whoever's studying fungi in Saskatchewan, they get funded, you're going to get maybe 500,000. And if it's a really sick idea, maybe $1 million. And that's how you're going to start your 90-day program.
Interesting.
And the overall goal, going back to the mission statements, is to disrupt or massively accelerate the technology. So this is kind of how they set up things. And one final point I have, they have another thing that I could find. It's called the Young Faculty Award. And this is, I think, probably a way to recruit program managers or anyone that you're interested in bringing into DARPA. With a Young Faculty Award, they're identifying and trying to engage with, this is a quote from the PowerPoint I was reading, rising stars in junior research positions. So I think they're probably, just like you would have scouts for some kind of sports team going around scouting stuff, they likely have people scouting who's got the latest, best science. And then they can give them this Young Faculty Award and fund them and expose them to the DoD needs and DARPA's program development process. And again, the goal of administering an award like this would be to develop the next generation of academic scientists, engineers, or mathematicians, and have them focus a significant portion of their career on DoD and national security issues. So it's, again, funding people to skew them in the realm that you want to study.
So when you say young faculty, like how young?
That's a good question. If I were to hazard a guess, I would say probably people between 35 to 40, just going off, if someone does a 4-year degree and then they do like a PhD, 8 years, they've been in school 12 years, whatever, they're probably like early mid 30s by the time they're ahead of a lab or something. So that would be my guess.
That makes sense.
Something like that.
There was just one other thing that I wanted to add on this point is, like you mentioned, they serve the 2 to 4 year term, but then usually afterwards they get scooped up by like a big tech company or a big pharma.
Yeah.
The revolving door.
Yeah, they're constantly like allowed to expand on their ideas. It's like they get that initial funding and then they go out and like continue their research. So they're still getting paid big dollars. It's just not directly through DARPA.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
still a pretty good gig. And if you can get in, you're set for life.
You're right. Yeah, it starts this foundation. And again, this is the mechanisms they can use to direct the next science that's being looked at as far as from a DoD perspective. It's quite interesting. It's smart. And honestly, I'm just spitballing here for a second. When I was doing research into this, there are a ton of papers discussing other countries writing papers about DARPA's process, and they're like, how can we implement this in our country because DARPA is doing such a good job? So that was very surprising to me. So other people are trying to model DARPA because of how effective they are at directing exactly what they need to be done. or what they need.
Well, and honestly, like just kind of going back to their YouTube page, they're honestly really good at marketing DARPA. Like I don't know if you've watched any video footage of when they have a competition, a tech competition that they're allowed to film. Fucking
I haven't.
Red Bull sponsors vehicle. It's like DARPA is really smart about hosting like these, tech competition. Who can the one that I saw, the one that was the best quality was in the beginning of the whole beginning of the idea of having a car drive itself. They had a bunch of people come out to a desert and run a track, and now it's like an annual thing I think they do. But Red Bull, it's like fucking Red
hilarious.
Bull. But DARPA's really smart. You like get young people who are into science. How do you do that? You put Red Bull on something. You know what I mean?
Bull,
and they're like, "Oh, DARPA, what's this? Maybe I'll go to Stanford and study science."
That's great.
But side note,
I love that. That's smart. But what we're going to do next, let's actually get into some of this technology that we've been teasing throughout the episode. And I think probably it's going to pique a lot of your audience's interests. If not, at least it's going to horrify someone. If you're not piqued by it, you're going to be horrified by the end of this. And I'll start us off with the biohybrids and biological robots. So what is a biohybrid? I know some people have probably heard of this. You mentioned Annie Jacobson. She was on a litany of podcasts several years ago discussing biohybrids. So maybe people have heard the term, but we're going to get into it here. So what is a biohybrid? This is the integration of living cells or organisms with non-living materials to endow useful properties. So basically, it's simply just the combination of biological and non-biological components to create useful devices or machines. So a biohybrid is essentially a biological robot, but it is slightly different. And I'll make that distinction as we get through some of this stuff. But the end goal, I found when I was looking into this, there's a lot of people that believe the end goal of DARPA's biohybrid research programs is simply to integrate humans and machine, get man machine together in some unique way, but start off with model organisms such as rats. That's kind of the gist I was finding. So when I'm going through this, I want listeners to understand that's kind of the end goal. When we're talking about how they can control rats in mazes, it's all towards integrating with man and machine eventually. That seemed to be the idea I was finding. So I'm going to first go through 3 examples, but these are pretty surprisingly dated at this point. When I mentioned Annie Jacobson, she was going around talking about some of this stuff when she was promoting you brought the book up, The Pentagon Brain, and she talked about how they had rats, pigeons, and moths that they were creating these biohybrids. So with the rats, they would implant brain chips, and this allowed the researchers to remotely navigate the animals through mazes, and they called them robo-rats. Yeah, it's wild. It's crazy.
I love that. That's great.
It's excellent. With the pigeons, they weren't really controlling the pigeons, but they did install mechanical hearts in pigeons. So again, probably that's pretty interesting, right? Like a mechanical heart. If that's a technology that's used, imagine that to be very useful, replacing a human heart if they needed it to be. But that's what they were doing with pigeons. The moths, though, is one of the craziest ones.
So I've got this video pulled up. Let me know when you're ready for it. I'll play it.
Okay, I'll tell you when.
Yeah.
So 2008 to 2014. So again, this is 10 years dated at this point. But DARPA was able to develop technology that could control the flight of a moth by electrically stimulating the moth's neurons. And they actually use a very big moth. It's called a Mandusa sexta moth, and that's the scientific name for this organism. And they exploited the process of metamorphosis to insert their electrodes. So they would insert and securely attach a device to the moth during the late pupa stage, and they would surgically insert an electrode between its neck and abdomen, and then the moth's tissues would develop around this implanted electrode, and this is how they secured the implant to the insect's body. Very wild. So they literally exploit the process of metamorphosis to do this implant. But the results, they have a steerable cyborg, which is part insect, part machine. And this was 10 years ago, so I don't even know what they could possibly be doing now. But James, maybe this is a good time to show the audience what this moth looks like.
This was hard for me to believe when I first was reading into this, and this is really real.
Wix.
Okay. All right. We don't need any of that. I don't. Hang on. Let me mute this shit.
It'd be so great if it was a Red Bull ad,
dude. That would be hilarious. All right. Let me wait until I can skip this shit. Okay. And I also need to mute it. All right. Can I? Oh, we can. Sick. Perfect. Yeah. Even the video looks dated.
Yeah. 2008, I guess, in this one.
They're just electrically stimulating the response of the wings. That's fucking crazy. It's literally 4 cables. It's 4 fucking cables.
Yeah, and we should say this is right. This is clearly primitive. This is 2008, and they were doing this till 2014 officially. So 6 years of development is probably much more crazy. And who even knows where this is now?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, here we go. Got a beetle too there.
Yeah.
Wicked. Okay, yeah, this one here that they're showing, that was my next point. So what this weird device is that he's showing in this video, they actually take the eyes of the moth and they use the eyes as sensors for a robot. So they're attaching it to a robot. So this is technically a biohybrid, but instead of it being electrode on a moth, it's moth eyes on robot. That's the synergy there. Yeah. Very wild.
Crazy. Yeah. The implanting it in the pupil stage is, again, there's a bunker somewhere where these guys are like, okay, attaching wires to this moth is just not doing it. How do we solve that? And some guy in that room was like, wait a minute. Let's implant it. Let's let it grow.
Yeah.
It's just, the biohybrids is definitely, it might be the fucking weirdest thing.
For me, it's
known thing.
It's the weirdest one. It's so out there, but it only gets crazier. So what I want to talk about next, I want to talk more about the biohybrid robotics. Those 3 examples I gave earlier, these are somewhat dated at this point, so I wanted to find where the field is at present. So what I want to talk about next, this is stuff that's been done over the last decade with biohybrids in various labs. Now, not everything I'm going to mention here is necessarily funded by DARPA, but we know that this research started with DARPA, with the moths, the rats, and such. So specifically what I'm talking about, I'm going to be referring to a paper that was written by Webster Wood et al. In 2023, so very recent data and information here. It was called Biohybrid Robots, Recent Progress, Challenges, and Perspectives. And this was published in the journal Bioinspiration and Biomimetics. What they first talk about in this paper is going over the different cyborgs which have been made. So these are biohybrids that are using machine and integrating it with different organisms. And this has been done in many different animals. The one that was very interesting is jellyfish. So jellyfish-based biohybrids, these were being studied to monitor the ocean, and they could actually make the jellyfish swim 3 times faster than a natural jellyfish. So I found that very interesting, that if you take that idea and apply it to other things, it seems like you could enhance function of various organisms based on how you're creating the biohybrid system. Now, clams were also used, and that's a pretty smart idea, right? Using a biohybrid clam to monitor water, that's fairly obvious. Weird one, there's such a thing as cyborg turtles, biohybrid cyborg turtles. They were studying this. They wanted to create a biohybrid robot with turtles for waypoint navigation, and they were able, in this study, to remotely control a turtle's walking behavior using visual stimulus. So go ahead.
The next step is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Hey, we got it all, right? The rats are being controlled. We got Master Splinter. We got the Ninja
Sick.
Turtles. Very awesome. Obviously, locusts, that's very similar. I'm not too surprised that locusts, they're making them jump with control. And then, as we mentioned, the moths, but also beetles and cockroaches for movement control. So this is a list of organisms that have been studied in this context. At least we're publicly aware of. Yeah. Now, what's more interesting than that, to me at least, it's not only these larger organisms that are being studied, there's also microorganism bots. So there's miniature biohybrid robots. And again, like, this sounds really crazy, but we have links to this paper, and this is a review paper on the whole field over the last decade. And this is what some labs are studying. They have these microscopic biohybrid robots. They're approximately 1 micron in size. So this is so small. This is 1/1000th of a millimeter. So very, very small. These are engineered microscopic unicellular organisms, and they're designing these biohybrid robots for different purposes. One purpose is using them as nanocarriers to deliver therapeutic loads. So, for example, I found references for bacteria-based biohybrids that could be triggered by UV light to deliver drugs to a certain location. This next one's the craziest one. There's biohybrid microorganism robots that can be magnetically steered. And what's crazy about them? They're sperm-powered biohybrids.
I mean, that's honestly what's kind of fucked about that, though, is it's like there's a pre-human pilot.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
That's fucked.
It's crazy. Well, it's like men are trying to get their sperm everywhere. It's like they're injecting it into people.
I guess.
Controlling it with magnetics.
Yeah.
But,
I thought I was the only one, but I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so they're trying to use this sperm-powered biohybrid to deliver drugs for cancer treatment. That's what the study actually is all about. But I just found it so funny. This is, again, like you were saying, we're like, how can we get the best circle jerk? And it's just all these people in a room. Wait a second. The sperm has a flagella.
Yeah, exactly.
Why don't we use that?
It's already got a motor system. We don't have to build one, right?
Yeah.
We just need to steer it.
Like, James, get to the bathroom.
On it. I'm on it. I got my cup.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so weird.
So this is another class of biohybrids. But the other thing that these microorganism bots are used for is just nanosensors for environmental monitoring in a nutshell. Now, my point being is, if this is what civilian labs are publishing over the last decade, in addition to what we know with Annie Jacobson's stuff that she was talking about, it's, again, how far has DARPA taken this? It's an interesting thought.
Well, and I've heard, I would need to like really dig for whatever this reference is, but nanotechnology is clearly that started to be an area of focus at least a decade ago too. Like there would be articles about people starting to look into it, but like very, very detailed sensors that could give you a variety of information that are as fine as a grain of dust.
Mm-hmm.
So surveillance, you don't even need to have your phone. You need to inhale some dust that got sprayed. And again, these are things that it's small enough to not like really fuck a human body up, but it's a reliable enough sensor to gain like some valuable information. There really is no tell. If this is stuff that is openly conversed about now, there's no telling. I don't know if this was related to the micro machines that you were talking about, but I saw a video of somebody like controlling a cellular size robot to split a cell.
Oh, interesting.
I was trying to find the video. I don't know if that's related to that, but again, doing things on a micro scale.
Right.
Is everything is getting smaller. Who knows? There could be some magic school bus shit.
Yeah,
You know what I
there
mean?
could
Like there could be an entire workhorse tank that you could put into somebody's body and just do whatever you want.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
all they'd have to do is like take a breath in. You
Yep.
spray a bunch of dust in a room, and they just need to breathe one of them in, and it gets you. So it's like
Izzo.
5G infecting our balls. Oh no!
Yeah.
It's gonna get us.
I did see a meme the other day where it's like you're walking around right now and you don't know that at any moment the magic school bus could be in your ass right now. Like,
That is true.
Yeah.
And that's
man.
we're there. We're absolutely there.
That's great. So, I want to go here into next. I want to talk about biohybrid methods and how they interface, how there's research trying to interface this with the nervous system. And I know Izzo, in one of his sections, he's going to be talking about brain-computer interfaces. So this is going to be somewhat related, and I think it will set it up very nice. But basically, we previously mentioned that one of the overall goals, or one of the proposed overall goals, is to develop systems that can integrate with humans. This seems to be what they're not trying to make a moth that they can fly. You're trying to start with model organisms and then move to humans. Probably. That would be my guess. If I was a scientist at DARPA, I would start there and move up. Now, what's crazy, I did find some potential evidence to support this claim. So I think we should go through a study. This is a DARPA-funded study from 2021. It was published by Zai et al., or written by Zai et al., 2021, and it's called Biohybrid Approaches to Interface with the Nervous System, the Best of Both Worlds. This was published in a journal called Current Opinion in Biotechnology. So, the goal of the research here was to develop a device to control genetically engineered neurons. And through this process, this would enable neuromodulation of this target cell population. So in this context, they want to control neurons. And this would allow control of these neurons using an external signaling system. So this is, in fact, a biohybrid system like we just discussed. In the context of what we're talking about here, this biohybrid system would be using some kind of external signaling system, using that to interface with neurons. So this is basically a neuromodulatory device, and this is a technology that would be capable of controlling specific neurons that possess a certain genetic modification. It sounds already really, really wild and out there and crazy, but this will make more sense when we get through the process here and some of the applications that this is proposed to be used for. But for listeners who are wondering what exactly I'm talking about with genetic modification here, typically, when I was reading this, they want to engineer a protein in the neurons to be different from other neurons. And then that signaling system that's external, you want it to be able to interact with the special new protein that you've genetically engineered the neurons to express. And what they refer to this is, they would call it a genetically encoded actuator. So they would call these genetically engineered neurons actuators. That's the technical term. But the process here, although this sounds crazy and pretty sci-fi, it can be broken down to a very simple process. It's really just 3 steps. The first is a stimulus. The second is using a synthetic material. And then the third is interfacing with whatever your genetically engineered cell population is. In the context what we're talking about, it's going to be a neuron. So to go into more detail here, the goal at the end of the day, use your stimulus, get it to do something for your actuator, which is the neuron in our case. So in step 1 with the stimulus, this can be actually a variety of different things. It just needs to be a way to deliver energy to the brain. So it can be a light source, it can be a heat, it can be electric fields, it can be a magnetic field, as we saw with the sperm-powered biobot we brought up, or it can be ultrasound. So there's a variety of different stimulus that can be used to achieve the goal. But the problem is with step 1 is usually the signal is going to be attenuated, it's going to become unfocused, and it's not going to be able to deliver the energy to activate your actuator. So there needs to be a solution here. And this is where the synthetic material comes in step 2. You need a middleman. You need some kind of device that can amplify the stimulus so that you can actually interact with this genetically defined population of cells used in the signal chain. So for step 2, this middleman step, this is some kind of micro or nanoparticle that simply, its whole purpose is to amplify the focus or the signal, or to convert that energy into some other form that can be used and interpreted by this genetic modification in whatever the target cell population is. For step 3, this is getting the signal to the actuator, which in our context, we're talking about a neuron. The genetically encoded neurons will be designed to express a protein that can detect whatever signal the synthetic material has produced after receiving the stimuli. So at present, that paper that I mentioned, they talk about a number of different things, but 3 main ones that I found. People are using this type of system, this biohybrid system, one for hybrid optogenetics. This is a method to convert long wavelengths of photons into shorter wavelengths to achieve optical modulation of neural activity. So in this case, they're using light, a long form, and then it's going to hit your step 2, that middleman step, whatever the synthetic material is. It's going to convert it to a shorter wavelength, and that shorter wavelength is going to be interpretable by whatever cell type they're trying to hit that's genetically modified in that context. For 2, this is acoustic control. So using ultrasound, which might come up later when we talk about some other shit, to interface with brain cells. Ultrasound, this is an attractive stimulus to use because it can be delivered safely to the skull. So if you can use it to activate synthetic materials that can activate genetically designed neurons to do something. Very interesting. The last one, magnetogenetics, we kind of brought this up again with the sperm-powered biorobot, but the stimulus here would be magnetic. So researchers would make genetically designed neurons to express an iron protein called ferritin with the goal of magnetically interacting with it to produce their downstream effects. So overall, if you could get this biohybrid interface system to be achieved, you could, as a researcher or someone, control these genetically designed neurons using an external stimulus. So in other words, you would create a biohybrid system that enables a direct interface with nervous systems. Pretty wild.
Yeah, that's really scary.
It is.
That's really scary sci-fi shit right there,
now,
for sure.
Totally. What's interesting about that whole litany of events that can be used, the official goal of work like this, when you're reading these papers, for instance, the one that I referenced here, you want to develop this technology. The researchers, they're interested in developing this technology so they can compensate for neurological damage. So you could imagine people with neurological deficiencies, such as someone who's blind, they simply can't see, or they're simply paralyzed so they can't experience touch or feel anymore. Well, using a system like this, if you could perfect it, you could literally just have people, you could just encode the perception in their brain. So if you're blind, whatever, the cells on your retina, just interface with them to see whatever it is you need to see.
Yeah. Or hear whatever you need to hear.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that's why people are researching this. It's not necessarily a crazy DARPA mind control thing, but this is where it's starting, is to try address certain needs like this, which I find interesting.
It's the same kind of thing with Neuralink. I don't know how either of you have gone down, but that's the general scientific consensus here is to how do we give people who have lost access to certain parts of their body, how do we regain those, how do we give them some sense of control?
Correct.
But ultimately, as soon as it proves to be an easily deployable medical solution, will it be optional to us?
Right.
Just as a extra layer of humanity. I don't know. We'll see.
So that's, great. I can dovetail off that. My initial thought after researching that section was this kind of sounds very simply that this could involve or easily evolve into some kind of mind control device, right? If you could manipulate perceptions of people from an external source of stimulus, that could be very easily tampered with and hijacked in a variety of ways. So, I'm thinking Manchurian candidate stuff. Maybe that's not so crazy.
No, for sure.
At this point, I'm not sure or certain in any way. I'm not making the claim that the science is there, that you actually understand the entire brain and how it works and how to integrate a biohybrid system like this. I'm just trying to point out that this is research that's happening. And if you could get to a level where you understand all these different neural pathways and you can specifically target neurons in that pathway, and then not only that, those specifically changed neurons, you can interact with them with a beam of light. Well, it seems you could hijack the subject's motor system, their thought patterns, their emotions, really whatever. And that's pretty crazy.
It's super crazy. This is also, like some real strange territory in the sense that you see the benefit that it could have for somebody who's lost one of those abilities or never had one of those abilities to have that ability again.
Right.
But there's also the side of me that even as we've been reading through this, this place in specific doesn't necessarily have moral qualms when it comes to, like, just because we're thinking that maybe that's something that they might be doing.
Yeah.
They probably thought about it. Not saying they're doing it, but I'm sure they're like, on someone's list, the Manchurian candidate was a bullet point. For sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would totally agree with that. And again, it's one of those things where we don't know exactly where the state of the art is for sure, just given how DARPA seems to be ahead of its time in various ways. So it's hard. We can only speculate at this point. But if this was a 2021 study, and this is what's actively being researched. Yeah. That study I referenced was DARPA funded. So,
I think this is one of those areas where it's not even unreasonable to think that they're entertaining all the fringe ideas that we're thinking. Are they entertaining? That it would be safe to assume that at least doesn't mean they did it, but somebody in that fucking room was like, we got to try this. If we're going to do all these other things too, we got to try this too, just to be sure.
So, what I want to end this biohybrid section with, I want to talk about something related but slightly different. It's called biological robots. So as of 2023, there are major labs that are partially being funded by DARPA to work on this unique thing called biological robots. And it's related, but it's not necessarily the same thing as a biohybrid. And I'll get into that in a second. But the paper that I'm referencing here, it's written by, the first author on it is Blackiston et al. 2023. It's called Biological Robots: Perspectives on an Emerging Interdisciplinary Field. And this was published in the journal Soft Robotics. And this is a review article that was partially funded by DARPA. So for listeners who aren't familiar, what exactly is a biological robot? These are living materials used to build a new kind of robotics. This differs from biohybrids in that the entire system here that we're talking about is biological. There's no synthetic or artificial component. It's a biological robot. It's still engineered, fabricated, or designed by researchers to do some type of human-designed function. It just doesn't have any synthetic components. It's all biological at this point. So that's the distinction between biohybrid and biological robot. Basically, you're using living material to build a robot. And it's obviously, this field of study obviously blurs the lines between what a classical organism is and what a robot is. Because we think of robots as nuts and bolts, but now all of a sudden you can use living matter, organic matter, and create a robot in the sense of what we would traditionally think of a robot. It's think of a drone, but instead of it being mechanical, maybe in the future it would have, like actual components. It's very interesting. But the research here, it's usually small in scale from what I was looking at, and they call them xenobots. And I want to be clear, this is a very new emerging field, so the nomenclature is not really settled. I've seen it referenced in many different ways, but I'm going to go with the term xenobot because I like that word. It's just cool, like a xenobot, like Autobot. It's like very Transformer or something.
Yeah,
but
it's super futuristic. I love it. Very alien.
Yeah. And they call it a xenobot because in this field of study, they typically use cells from a frog. And the frog's scientific name is Xenopus laevis. So that's where the xenobot comes from. But what a xenobot is, it's an autonomous biological robot made by humans that can exhibit a diverse array of functions. So some of the functions that are being studied, they're trying to design these xenobots with the hopes of potentially helping to clean up the environment, maybe even clean up the human body. You could think of this in respect to an infection. Maybe you can have injectable xenobots that can clear a virus. And you could also think... Oh, yeah, that too. Yeah. Definitely. You could also think of it in the context of cancer. Can these xenobots find cancers, clear them out? Be a very interesting application. There's also the application of using them to monitor industrial processes, as well as delivering medicines in various contexts. Finally, regenerative medicine. In this paper, one of the authors talked about micro-sculpting bioengineered tissues using xenobots so that you could use them to build the tissue you need for transplants. So very ton of applications for these, and you could see why DARPA would be funding something like this. And to be clear here, because we're talking about biological robots, these xenobots, they can be self-powered, self-driving, self-repairing, and even self-replicating. Just like normal cells can divide and create more of themselves, a xenobot has the ability of doing that. Taking up nutrients from its environment, using it to replicate itself. It's very interesting. An analogy I like to think about when thinking about these biological robots or xenobots is it's like Lego, but it has agency. So, if you make a Lego structure, it's going to hold its shape and sit, but it doesn't have behavior and it doesn't really interact with anything. Well, in this case, they were calling this literally agential material. You're creating robots that have agency. Not necessarily thought. I should be clear on that. It's not like they have a central nervous system and a brain and can think about things. But in the same way a vending machine works, where you put a quarter in and the mechanism leads to you getting a pop, like a xenobot through its biological engineering can do specific tasks. But it's not necessarily thinking about it. It's just like a chain of reactions to do something. So they're not necessarily intelligent. They're quite literally a biological robot, which I find very fascinating. And before I give this over to Izzo to talk about some of the other crazy shit going on, I just want to say one of the authors on this paper, his name's Dr. Michael Levin. We did cover him on an episode where we talked about bioelectricity, which is insane. But this guy, have you heard of Michael Levin, James?
Pull him up right now.
This guy, I think he's probably going to win a Nobel Prize at some point. So I just want people to be aware of him. The stuff he's doing is akin to, what Crick was doing discovering DNA back in the day. This bioelectricity, the xenobots, it's quite ridiculous shit. But some of his stuff is funded by DARPA based on what I was looking at. So you can take that for what it is.
Interesting.
But yeah, the stuff he's doing is crazy. Very, very crazy.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it really, this is like, I just love and hate that this is the precipice of technology that we're dealing with now. It's super, there's like the futurist inside of me that's like, fuck, that is so cool that we can do that. And then there's the other side of me that's like, man, how are they using it? I know they're making this. I don't have a problem with them making it. I really question the motivations and how they're using it, but we'll see.
Right. It goes back to the duality of everything, right?
Precisely. Yeah. The gift and the curse.
Yep.
All right. So in the next section here, I'm going to touch on similar things that Magnum covered in terms of like the biohybrids and stuff. But this is actually in regards to how it interacts with humans currently from the research that DARPA is doing. So it's called brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, and DARPA has been at the forefront of brain-computer interface research, aiming to revolutionize how humans interact with machines and each other. So their initiatives span a wide range of applications, from medical breakthroughs to national security enhancements, so maybe even building like this super soldier. And then what they're working on is implantable BCIs. So they're funding the development of implantable brain-computer interfaces that allow direct communication between the human brain and external devices. And these interfaces have shown promise in controlling prosthetic limbs with unprecedented precision, restoring sensory feedback for amputees, and enabling thought-based control of machines and computer systems. So just kind of interacting with a computer simply by thinking about it, thinking which direction you want to go, stuff like that. So they're already working on this technology, and it's public, so they're probably way further than this now, too.
Yeah.
But the other cool thing that Magnum was touching on before is the non-invasive neurotechnology. So instead of having to actually like go under surgery or like having something implanted in you, they're also investing in non-invasive like neurotechnology. So, and this stuff is called the Next Generation Non-Surgical Nanotechnology, or N3. And this program aims to develop high-performance bidirectional brain-machine interfaces that don't require surgery. So you could interact with the machine, but the machine could also interact with your own brain.
Yeah, it's weird.
What?
It is crazy. And like the current N3 technology, so it's man-portable and accessible to a wider population. So essentially, think of just putting a helmet on, and all of a sudden you can interact with a supercomputer, essentially. You have the precision to interact with 16 independent channels. So that means you could be doing 16 different things at the same time, or interacting with 16 different computers at the same time. And the response time is 50 milliseconds for these things to like have that communication to the machine and back to you.
And it's I see here it's saying 16 independent channels within a 16 mm. Is that micro?
Like a
millimeter.
Yeah, millimeter.
What millimeter cubed? So a very small amount of space with a very small amount of brain tissue, you can have 16 independent channels.
Yeah, it's like smaller than a current chip, maybe like a grain of rice, essentially, and you can interact with 16 different computers from a grain of rice.
And a latency of 50 milliseconds.
Yeah. And it's not only that, but you have the ability to combine these devices. So now you can interface with multiple brain regions simultaneously. So not only could it be like impacting your thought process, but it could be connected to like a motor sensory cortex where you involve movement as well. So essentially, you're able to take in a lot of stimuli and then act on it in rapid time.
So I'm seeing some overlap here already. What you're talking about, this helmet, right? So if your helmet has the ability to send signals and receive signals, you could easily see how what I was talking about earlier, if you could genetically engineer neurons of a specific region of the brain to have certain responses to certain stimulus, you could easily see how just wearing a helmet, emitting whatever, whether it's ultrasound or magnetics, how it could control that specific region or interact with it. Yeah. So maybe it seems to me like if I was the researchers in this lab, I would just put those two together if I worked for DARPA.
And they actually have, so I'll get into it a little bit later on, but they're like introducing essentially gene editing, but introducing it through a virus. So
right, well,
another organism like that, but we'll get into it a little bit later on as well. But the current applications of this N3 technology, so you can start thinking about them, but you can start controlling unmanned aerial vehicles through just your thoughts. You enhance your multitasking during complex military missions, and you can activate cyber defense systems with your mind. So you become this computer. Yeah, so that's pretty
buy Bitcoin.
I think, exactly. Make sure you're mining Bitcoin with your brain. These, I think you guys are right in the sense that though these are compartmentalized projects, when you start looking at all the projects, like for the forest for the trees, it sure seems like they're trying to make, right now people are flying drones with fucking Xbox controllers, right? So the next level up from that is having someone control anything and all of these unmanned vehicles, all the Mars, all the ones that I brought up. How much easier would that be? No human goes on the battlefield. There's a warehouse with seats and helmets, and you have people who are completely integrated with technology put on the helmet, and even if the drone gets blown up, it's whatever. They'll send another one out there and they'll pilot that one. It definitely seems like where it's going. So
it's like the constraints of war at that point, if that was achieved, would quite literally just be how fast can you churn out drones. So like your constraint would just be natural resource, like how much material can you get to build metal or whatever the components are.
At chips too.
Yeah, chips. That's right.
We're still kind of experiencing that, but
interesting.
I'm almost certain that there'd be a bottleneck there.
Yeah.
But that becomes the limitation. But I've thought about this a fair amount, and like, yes, that's idealistically good. We pick a desert and we have a robot fight, but there's got to be some human cost. No superpower is just going to blow up robots for a long time.
You're right.
At some point they're going to go for the jugular. That's how you win a war.
Yeah.
And the question then becomes is like, okay, so maybe they're not nuking, maybe they're putting nanobots in the water that are going to dissolve our brains. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
sperm-powered nanobots that dissolve our brain.
Everyone giving a blowjob is going to be screwed. You're compromised, buddy. You're done. But that's kind of where my brain goes with this. Is like, that's all well and good to have a drone battle somewhere, but at some point, the sycophant in charge is going to be like, we need to kill people. Need to die. That's how we win this war. Is people dying. Robots doesn't matter.
That's true. Yeah. Very true.
I wanted to touch on like a point that you mentioned earlier of just people putting on helmets. You can take it out of a military context as well. So think of like Amazon Prime. I don't know if they're doing this, but maybe they are. So that's where I heard it. But they have like robots that help load and unload boxes. So instead of a human doing it, they have these helmets in Asian countries like the Philippines where the labor laws are worse and you can pay people much less. But essentially they just pick up like this helmet, they put on these gloves, and then they're controlling the robot from across the world, and they're getting paid, like $1 instead of the minimum wage wherever the warehouse is located.
And it's also training the AI algorithm system so that eventually they don't even need that $3 an hour person or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but so in this research, I came across something that I thought was very interesting, and it was the cognitive enhancement. So they have something called a transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS. And in 2011, a science writer, Sally Addy, experienced the effects of this during an Army training simulation. So the technology reportedly improved focus and eliminated negative self-talk, significantly enhanced shooting accuracy, and altered time perception. So the simulation was supposed to last 20 minutes, and the person wearing this helmet and was in this simulation, they thought it was only like a few minutes that passed. So this science writer in 2007, she attended a technology conference for DARPA. And when she learned about the brain surface electrical stimulation method that allegedly cut the time in half that it takes a person to go from a novice to an expert in sharpshooting. So the brain simulation technique was presented as a way to potentially speed up language learning and mathematical aptitude.
Holy shit.
So in 2011, she flew from London to California to participate in one of these Army training simulations with a device on her head delivering electrical currents. And Addie went from a frustrated shooter to a skilled sniper. So essentially in the story, she was like very jet lagged, very like emotionally unstable that day. And they had her like in the simulation without the device turned on, just like trying to shoot targets, and she was missing everything. She wasn't even like hitting the minimum qualifications to like move on to the next stage or level or wave. And when this device was turned on, she went from this person that barely knew how to shoot in the simulation to an expert, where wave after wave there was like enemies coming at her, and she was able to just like snipe them all essentially. And it was a 20-minute simulation, and she was just like going through it, no negative self-talk. So before, she was like, oh, I'm so bad at this, like how am I ever gonna, I'm trying to impress these people, and here I am like not making it past level 1, and this device is turned on and she becomes an expert in it. So,
What?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty
Like, it wasn't
crazy.
even like practice sessions, that it was just like an instant kind of thing?
Yeah, like instantly they just flipped the device on, and her senses were heightened. She was able to just like lock onto a target immediately, and yeah, get through wave after wave of enemy, like simulated enemy forces.
I have so many thoughts on this. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, first I know that First I know that this transcranial magnetic stimulation, this is a therapeutic as well. So I know that this is used for treatments, even with depression, anxiety, and stuff. So I know that this technology is not necessarily specifically military. So I find it very interesting that it's applied to that. And it seems to me, maybe it's not that surprising. If you're stimulating a certain region of the brain, normally if that region's maybe not stimulated, you're taking in everything around you, right? But now that you've stimulated that area, like you were saying, your emotions are suppressed, maybe your impulses are suppressed, maybe your hearing's even suppressed, and it's just the thing you're focused on. So maybe that's the mechanism here?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah, that's what it was talking about. Like,
Okay.
the neurons in her brain were being stimulated to like better focus on a target, eliminate those emotions that she was having, and just kind of like see a target approaching, and then be able to like quickly turn her attention and focus on it, rather than it being on her own kind of volition. It was just there.
That's crazy. And I don't want to digress us here, but I found when you said altered time perception, that stuck out so much to me, because it made me immediately think a lot of. Now I'm gonna go real quick. I don't want to go too long on this point, but with the whole UFO abduction phenomena, a lot of people report altered time and missing time. So I'm wondering, is that due to some kind of magnetics that's being used in whatever this technology is, this extraterrestrial tech?
Yeah.
We really don't have to go deep into this, but this is relevant because I'm reading this book, and this book is talking in a good deal about the perception of time and how easily that is fooled, or what little we know about how what is time and how do we really interact with it. It's this book called Stalking the Wild Premium.
I literally read that maybe 4 weeks ago. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Synchronicities.
The guy who did did you guys see the disclosure where the guy talked about working at South Pole Station and the neutrino detector?
No.
Stephen Greer. I'll post the link in here, but anyways, this guy talks a lot about this book, and I read this. I just started reading him about halfway through, and so far, at least a quarter of the book, or I guess, a quarter of the total book, is about the human, how we perceive time, and I mean, you read it, so that book's on the CIA website too.
It's the whole astral projection, out of body experience thing that was disclosed. A lot of that, and basically it's just a rewriting of Isaac Benstoff's book, basically. If you're familiar with what I'm talking about, that there was a declassified document came out. It was talking about out of body experience. The gateway process. Yeah.
Hang on, I've got one more. This book. This is like the hippier version of that, Limitless Mind by Russell Targ.
Okay, I'm familiar with Targ, yeah.
Yeah, Russell Targ, How Put Off Remote Viewing. But the Limitless Mind is more him just saying, I think there's something here. Itzhak Bentov's book is more like I think there's something here, and here's how I think the mechanics work. Highly recommend it. I will also link that in the description.
Yeah, for listeners, just while we're on this tangent, Iztok Bentov, he actually died in a plane explosion before the plane even went off, before it could even take flight. It's kind of weird.
Really?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you should check it out.
Damn.
Yeah, that's how he died. The plane just blew up.
Jeez.
Well,
anyways, let's back on the
let's
subject.
digress.
Back on the subject.
it's funny that you guys look deep into that altering time perception. I just thought of it as time flies when you're having fun. So she was having so much fun playing the simulation now that she was doing good that it just flew by.
Well, and that's
killing everyone. It's so great.
Yeah, right. This is such a great time. I love this. That kind of is in the book. He references that idea a lot about, again, how do we interact with time? We've all had the experience where we're doing something we hate and it seems like time's moving slower, and we're doing something that we enjoy. The thing, honestly, the time perception is fucked. The improving focus and eliminating negative self-talk, depending on how that was achieved, like maybe she's doing better, so she's less inclined to talk shit. Mm-hmm. But then there's the idea that, like, what if it's just stimulating the part of your brain that's stimulated when you feel confident?
Right.
That's fucking crazy.
Yep.
That's crazy.
All right, so we're gonna move on a little bit from that, and the next thing that I want to talk about is about this guy named Jacob Robinson. So he's an associate professor at Rice University, and he's on the cutting edge of this research in neurotechnology and bioelectronics. So his work focuses on developing minimally invasive devices to manipulate and monitor neural activity. So the thing that he's working on right now was working on is called the MOANA project, and that stands for Magnetic Optical Acoustic Neural Access Project. So it aims to create a wireless brain-to-brain communication system, and he figured out how to tap into and control the brains of fruit flies. So very similar to that, like, biohybrid
right,
session.
but remotely, without connections,
Yeah.
wirelessly.
And
Okay.
so the team, they used magnetic nanoparticles to activate neurons in fruit flies,
Oh, there you
causing
go.
them to alter their wing position. And the team then uses genetic engineering to express an ion channel in the fly's neuronal cells, which is activated by heat. And then those magnetic nanoparticles that become heated when a magnetic field is applied, these things that were injected into the flies, they're placed in an enclosure with an electromagnetic magnet on top, and then when exposed to heat, the flies partially spread their wings. So using magnets, they induce the neurons to start firing and then operate the wings.
That goes back, yeah, that's exactly it, right? Stimulus, synthetic material, and then you manipulate the genetically engineered target cell population.
Exactly.
So it's exactly what we were talking about, but to the neurons and fruit flies.
Yeah, and like the next step in this is it could enable rapid communication between human brains and machines, as we mentioned, the transmission of sensory experiences between individuals. So not only from machine, but like between you and I, let's say, we could start feeling the same things. And then it also can enhance data analysis capabilities. So you're collecting all this data information and now you're processing it at a higher rate. But the approach was unique, and I mentioned it earlier, but they use viral vectors to deliver genetic material into specific neurons, and then they make those neurons produce proteins that either absorb light when firing, allowing detection of neural activity. They tether to magnetic nanoparticles for magnetic stimulation, and this system aims to both read and write information to the brain without requiring surgery. So have not just sensing it, but controlling it.
Yeah, it's super wild. It's essentially what we were talking about earlier, but an actual application of it with a model organism of a fruit fly.
Yeah.
And obviously that's what we were talking about before. Going back to the moths, you start with a lower model organism, and in this case, fruit fly. But the goal eventually is to move it up into probably mammals next, and then humans at some point. You would assume. That was what I would assume the trajectory would be for something like this.
Well, it's again, like this is the trend. The trend is drones. The trend is I don't know if you guys have looked into like the next gen, the supposed developments in next-gen stealth technology, but there's this idea, and all the aerospace military contractors are vying for these bids to have drone support vehicles. So you have an F-22 that's piloted by a person, but every F-22 or F-35 or B-2 comes with 2 drones that the pilot is also controlling and can act as whatever he needs them to act at in his particular situation. So you go from having one skilled pilot in an F-22, which again takes years to learn how to do. You have one skilled pilot in the air. You have a fleet of pilots in the air, each with 2 subordinate drone ships that can respond to whatever the needs of that particular fighter are. If it's getting attacked, it's hitting the enemy from behind, or delivering a payload, or getting super close to the ground to like get a very accurate idea of where you're trying to put this bomb. Or this is the trend. The trend is, how do we get human brains to keep up with the computers that we have in all of these weapon systems? And I've never, some of this shit that you guys have found, I've never even heard of, but this is obviously like prosaic in the sense that it's available for us to read about, but that this is the trend. The trend is to kind of like Licklighter, like completely merge humans and technology. Yeah. Just when you think we couldn't get any more merged, here we go. That's wild.
Yeah. I was also like very interested in like finding out where this type of research started, and it led me to Project Pandora. So it has its roots in like the Cold War era research in the 1960s. So Project Pandora, it wanted to investigate the potential effects of microwave radiation on human behavior and cognition. And it was actually initiated in response to what is known as the Moscow signal, which was a low-level microwave radiation, which was detected at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And there were concerns that the Soviet Union might be using microwaves as a weapon to influence the behavior of embassy workers or interfere with their work. So they thought, they were just like getting bombarded by microwaves, making them dumb and maybe lazy, didn't want to work. So this guy, Richard Cesaro, he was a propulsion expert with no background in biological sciences. He starts leading this project, Pandora, and his enthusiasm for developing microwave weapons raised some concerns among Pentagon scientists. And then they might have seen that maybe he had ulterior motives for microwave research. So Project Pandora was officially ended in 1969. But it does represent like that early investigation into like what could be affecting our brains, and like how can we start manipulating this to develop neurotechnology.
I just love how like in a world of fringe ideas, this guy's ideas, the scientists were like, wait a minute, buddy.
Yeah.
I think you're taking this a little too far. Okay.
Yeah, even the Pentagon's like, hey, we got to slow it down, man.
Yeah, and I was like looking into like some of this research, and before it was called Project Pandora, it was called Plan 562. And essentially there was one test done on monkeys with microwaves, and this one test that was done, they didn't provide any evidence to the Pentagon, but they're like, oh yeah, this monkey stopped doing tasks that had been learned by the monkey, and it's because of this microwave exposure. So then, they thought about funding it. It wasn't until some other dude came in. Let me just find it here. So this data finally started getting reviewed by some guy named Sam Kozlov, and he criticized the actual methodology of the experiment and was like, yeah, there is no basis here to like keep funding this project. Clearly there's ulterior motives. So this Richard Cesaro guy was just crazy. And he wasn't even like supposed to be there. He had no knowledge on this subject. He was a propulsion expert, so like a military guy, and he wanted to just build military weapons. So
yeah.
That's so crazy. This is what you're saying right now is going to set up the next section so brilliantly. It's crazy. We might all be canceled after this because it seems like we're figuring it out.
Yeah.
Well, but look, this is what we were talking about before. This is all available information.
Yes.
Like none of us had to violate any national security laws to get this info. This shit is freely available on the internet.
Yes.
And some of the shit you're finding is really fucking me up because you think you know about something and then you just don't. Yeah, but this is definitely where it's going to get weird. Let's keep digging in here. This is the strange territory we find ourselves in now.
Izzo, are you here still?
Yeah, I'm here, but
okay.
Setting you up for. I think that was a setup for the.
Oh, I thought.
Section.
Oh, okay. My bad. My bad. Perfect setup. Okay, what I want to do next, dovetailing off what Izzo just described, we're going to be talking about directed energy weapons, and there's a number of things we're going to go through here. But just to give the audience a definition of what we're talking about, what is a directed energy weapon? A directed energy weapon is a ranged weapon that damages its target with highly focused energy without a solid projectile, including lasers, microwaves, particle beams, and sound beams. That's the definition. Now, the reason this type of technology is being researched is because it offers several unique advantages. One of them is simply speed of light engagement time. Right? If you're using photons, high-powered photons with a laser or something, you're moving at the speed of light. That's incredibly fast that's the speed limit of the universe. That's literally the fastest you could shoot something is with a laser. They're less expensive than munitions because it's just energy you're converting into photons. They have deeper magazines. Assuming you have a sufficient power supply, you don't have to reload things. As long as your power supply is there, you can just keep firing your directed energy weapon. Now, there was a Nobel Prize winning physicist named Charles Townes, who also helped found the Jason scientists. Going back to what James said in the introduction here, this guy invented the precursor device of lasers and worked with DARPA in the 60s to weaponize lasers. They had this program. It was called the 8th Card Program, and the idea was to develop an 8th card. This was the idea that you could use something against the Soviets. You'd have this 8th card, this trump card that you could put out in the event of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Now, the 8th Card Program, this changed into Project Delta, which in 1973 used the first offensive laser-based directed energy weapon to shoot down a drone at Kirtland Air Force Base. So at the time, Project Delta was a part of DARPA, which is now known as DARPA. So this kind of goes back to what you were saying early in the history here. There's some drones, there's directed energy weapons, but they were actually using this in 1973. This laser-based directed energy weapon. Since then, it's generally acknowledged that laser-based weapons, well, not generally acknowledged, it's absolutely known that laser-based directed weapons are used in a modern context. There's the Zeus laser system, which was used to detonate IEDs, and the military has also destroyed various drones in many different field tests. So this is kind of a short, maybe, history of directed energy weapons. They've been being used for quite a long time, and they are used in a modern context. There's two programs I want to bring up specifically from DARPA that have to do with directed energy weapons. The first, it's called the Warden Program, and again, sick acronym. It's the Waveform Agile Radio Frequency Directed Energy Program. And this seeks to develop hardware, theory, and computational models to extend the range and effectiveness of high-power microwave systems. Perfect dovetail off what Izzo is saying. Currently, this is a program that's being researched at DARPA, the Warden Program. So this, what was his name? Richard Cesaro? Cesaro. Seems potentially maybe some stuff he was working on is still being worked on or moved forward. I don't know. But this high power microwave systems, this is a class of directed energy weapon. They use electromagnetic radiation to disrupt or damage targets. And the goal with these high powered microwaves is to render electronics non-functional. So I would assume if you're firing, again, going back to this trend of drones, you could fire this at a drone, it would fall out of the sky. Yeah, in theory. I want to note, this is an interesting kind of tidbit. The high-powered microwaves, when they're fired, the trajectory of the beam of energy, it's like a cone. So it's narrow from the source, but it widens towards its target. Whereas when we're talking about laser-powered directed energy weapons, they do remain narrow. And they can be as narrow as 7 millimeters in diameter only. So that's very interesting. So it's like a microwave can target probably a broad range of things, whereas lasers are more specific.
And this is a super short video of
let's play it.
A laser shooting a drone out of the sky, and this video is clearly dated. You can tell by the pixelation, 2012.
Yeah, here we go.
I first saw this shit. I don't know which exact platform this is, but this was on the internet at least like 2014, and the laser's already hit it. You don't even see it. So it's
wild.
Again, for people who think this is science fiction, it is not. This is 100% tangible shit on ships in use on the battlefield right
I wonder
now.
if they're putting it on sharks, like Austin Powers style. Just
there was. I'd have to.
Oh no, there is
the dolphins.
Come
there was
on.
like some weird thing that they were trying to like control dolphins in the 60s.
Of course.
Like one of the first biohybrid things was like, how do we attach an electrical box to a dolphin so that we can steer it and use it for surveillance?
That's hilarious.
I think it was also at one point discussed weaponizing them, like at putting some kind of laser or some kind of disruptive weapon or signals intelligence disruptor on them and getting them into a behind enemy lines kind of situation.
Of course. That's crazy. Biohybrid laser dolphin, sure.
I mean, that sounds sick. Yeah, let's go.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. So I do know, based on the research I was doing, DARPA's this Warden program, it received $20 million in funding in 2024. And I find that the reason I'm bringing that up, if you recall when I was talking about the typical funding for DARPA projects, 500,000 to $1 million, and this one got 20 million, it suggests to me that this program is probably very successful and it warrants greater funding. And I did find that it was going to receive an additional 8 million, which was requested for 2025. So $28 million program into high power microwave directed energy weapons. There you go. I thought that was interesting. I actually didn't know that this was happening. The next one is DARPA's HELADS program. This stands for High Energy Liquid Laser Area Defense System. This is high-powered lasers. High-powered lasers, they're desired because they can counter multiple threats in a precise manner at the speed of light. Like we talked about, extremely fast, but this precision, 7 millimeters, is nothing. You can target manned and unmanned crafts, as well as enemy air or surface threats with these. The goal of this program is to develop high-powered lasers that are 10 times smaller and lighter than the state-of-the-art. And they want to use these to target and destroy motors, rockets, vehicles, and surface-to-air missiles. I'd assume drones would probably be on that list as well.
Of a certain size, yeah.
Yeah. But those are some directed energy weapons that we know were being explored by DARPA. But what I wanted to mention next, and this kind of ties into what Izzo brought up in the last section. When I was researching this, I came across the idea that invisible weapons were being used to target government officials. It's specifically Havana syndrome. And I don't want to go super deep into this, but I want to briefly mention it because it just seems to fit into everything that we're talking about right now. So for listeners who aren't familiar, Havana syndrome, this is a disorder that was allegedly caused by ultrasonic sound waves used as weapons to damage the brains of government officials overseas. And I realize this sounds highly speculative and crazy right now, but let's go through some of the evidence we have for this.
It won't for long.
Yes. Some allege that a weird piercing sound came out of nowhere in Havana, Cuba, and this may have been an unknown invisible targeted weapon. Now, many people, after hearing this sound, they reported feeling the following symptoms: extreme nausea, dizziness, vertigo, excruciating headaches, brain fog. Some were referring to this as it felt like their brain had been turned off. Now, there was nearly 200 reported cases, and of these 200 reported cases, about half of them involved CIA agents.
Shocker.
So, okay, like, seems highly targeted, but maybe not. Maybe this is just very unlikely. But to me, this increases the credence that this was probably a sonic target attack, but I don't know. I'm speculating. There was many cases that occurred. Many of these cases occurred to U.S. government officials and military personnel abroad. And the Central Intelligence Agency Director, William Burns, has publicly called these attacks. Now, where things get more crazy for me, there are brain scans that have revealed that some people who reported having Havana syndrome had indeed experienced damage to widespread brain networks without a history of physical head injury. So specifically what I'm referring to here, there's a paper. The first author on it is Verma et al., published in 2019. It's called Neuroimaging Findings in U.S. Government Personnel with Possible Exposure to Directional Phenomena in Havana, Cuba. Now, this was published in a journal called JAMA, and this is honestly a very high prestige kind of top journal in medicine and science. It has a very high impact factor, so it's not some obscure thing. This is pretty mainstream. What they were saying in this is essentially there was less white matter and connectivity in the white matter, and they referred to this as a brain network disorder. So what's important, what this paper is alluding to, it doesn't seem that this was simply psychosomatic. It wasn't simply the case that people were anxious or nervous and all of a sudden were like, oh, I think I'm being targeted by something. Oh, it actually, they had physical damage being observed based on brain scans. And not only that, they published this in a scientific journal, JAMA. So to me, that's pretty out of fucking control when it comes to this directed energy weapon stuff, especially when Izzo was mentioning the microwave stuff that was shut down out of nowhere. I'm not sure what's going on here, but speaking of, we're Canadian, this is funny. There are MRI scans that have been given to Canadian diplomats in March 2018, and the scans showed evidence of brain damage that mirrored injuries of the American reports. So specifically, there was 14 Canadian diplomats with concussion-like symptoms that were previously stationed in Havana, and they're actually suing the Canadian government right now for $28 million.
Damn.
So this is a lawsuit. These people are like, something happened, we don't know what, we're suing you. And one of the lady's neurologists, she said that it was as if she had aged 20 years all at once, one of the victims in this lawsuit. Wow. So I don't know what you guys think, but based on what Izzo's saying with this stuff that's shut down and this directed energy weapon stuff I've just brought up here, it seems like this is operational. I don't know. Speculating.
This is definitely the alleged territory that the socials don't like. So we'll have to tread carefully here. But there's a couple points that I like to make whenever I've brought this subject up, because a lot of people don't take into consideration the scale of this shit. And it's not just DARPA. It's not just one military. It's a whole bunch of scientists all over the world utilizing this type of technology in an already abundantly crowded electromagnetic space on planet Earth. There's a lot of these things that are in use right now. Mm-hmm. And some of the most known, I will pull up here. First, with relation to the Havana syndrome, there's the Duga radar. And there's people that suppose that this is, or this type of technology is what caused Havana syndrome. Interesting. And this was a Russian radar that was in operation between 76 and 89. This is comparable. It emits a very specific sound, which somebody at one point called the woodpecker before they knew what this was. But this is a very, very intense array that people thought that the Russians were using for this purpose. The comparable thing in America would be HARP. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Ice Cat in Norway. There's a bunch of these arrays around the world, but they all kind of start popping up around this time, tail end of the Cold War, 80s and 90s. And there's a lot of people that think this is the shit that is responsible for targeting individuals. And absolutely, it's no shock that most of those people were CIA. Those are the people who are going to be targeted, right? Of course. Like they're the people who would be on the radar of somebody who would be using this radar, you know? The other thing, these are much more prosaic, but LRADs, long-range acoustic devices. Most police, this is NYC, but most police forces in bigger cities have these now, and this is an acoustic device that will blast you in a very hyper-directional way, a sound that will disperse a crowd. It's super high pitch. It's just a really grating sound, and you can localize it so that you can have this in the middle of a New York City street, but if you're pointing it at the crowd, no one else around it is hearing the sound, only the people that you're targeting. There's actually a really popular brand that, they're just like a super prosaic website, but here you see it on a Navy ship. This was used heavily in the Iraq and Afghanistan war. That's the sonic application of these weapons. And this, again, I'm not making this up. This is a real thing. Bunch of companies make these, and they use them for crowd dispersal. And all of them have a safety zone that it's like, this is fine. You can you can blast this on anyone and they'll be okay. Mm-hmm. But then all of them also have a red portion.
Okay.
Where it might not kill you, but it'll fuck your hearing up forever.
I see, yeah.
So they're very powerful. This isn't some shit that, like, if they accidentally use it, they could rupture your eardrums kind of shit.
I see, okay.
That's how crazy, and it's just sound. Hyper-directional sound.
Hyper-directional sound. That's so interesting. Thank God we don't have genetically engineered neurons in our head, because you could just target us with this.
Exactly right. Yeah. With hyper-directional sounds that make us do specific things.
Yeah.
The microwave version of those are called active denial systems, or ADSs. And this is most commonly referred to as the heat ray, because this will hit somebody with microwave energy, but it makes their skin feel like it's on fire.
Whoa.
And again, this will cook you. If you don't move, if you're just getting bombarded, if you're trapped and you're getting bombarded like this, you'll get cooked. But you can find videos of them demoing these products for police on YouTube right now. I won't show them here, but this is prosaic technology. If you live in a big city, your police force probably has some of this shit.
Interesting.
And then this is just another
great acronym. Yeah,
it's another great acronym. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if this was particularly associated with DARPA, but this is another of these types of weapons that it'll here. This is my favorite part. It is possible to raise the auditory sensation to a discomfort level, deterring personnel from entering a protected perimeter, or, if necessary, temporarily incapacitating particular individuals. And that's mob excess deterrent using silent audio, but it says it's based on microwave auditory effect. That's a whole other rabbit hole we do not need to go into. But this is just for people who are listening and the people who are watching. This is very real shit, very tangible. And if these types of platforms are available as freely as they are with like generic company websites selling them, who knows what's the true scale of fuckery that they're doing in black programs. But and honestly, this dude Izzo, this is my favorite. This is my favorite part right here. Because this thing has been getting kind of a lot of attention recently, and it's so fucking badass. So take us through it.
All right, yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about three different things: the Manta ray technology, slaughter bots, and then the state of AI. So we'll start with the Manta ray. So it's a DARPA project, and it was launched in 2020 to develop a new class of long-duration, long-range, payload-capable, unmanned undersea vehicles, so the abbreviation UUVs. So this innovative project aims to create UUVs that can operate for extended periods without human logistic support, maintenance, and it potentially changes the maritime operations. So it's dubbed Manta Ray because the drone, it's an underwater drone, is modeled after the filter-feeding fish of the same name. So it has a diamond-shaped body with wing-like fins, and the prototype is designed and built by the aerospace and defense company Northrop Grumman. And this biomimicry design contributes to the unmanned undersea vehicle's efficiency and maneuverability underwater. So the key features of the Manta Ray UUV include their propulsion system. So the vehicle employs an efficient buoyancy-driven gliding system, so changing its buoyancy to rise and fall through the water, much like the Manta Ray. The energy conservation, so it can anchor itself to the seabed and enter a low-power hibernation mode to conserve energy during long missions. It could also start recharging and using other sources of power to keep itself going, maybe like tidal wave or the change in salinity in the water can power this recharge capability. It has a modular design, so it can be disassembled into 5 standard shipping containers, and it allows it to be delivered anywhere in the world easily and then just put together there. So instead of using the energy to slowly make its way there, it can just be put on ships and assembled where it needs to be. And then it also has payload capability. So it's designed with multiple payload bays of various sizes. So it enables a wide range of applications. So you could have it being the mothership with other underwater drones being housed inside. You can bring supplies, long distances, stuff like that. And the U.S. Navy sees the Manta Ray as a potential game changer for long-duration undersea operations, which include mapping, mine detection, surveillance, and it enhances security for both military and commercial maritime activities. So these things could just be in the water. So in early 2024, this is when a prototype of full scale was completed and in-water testing was done off the southern coast of California. And the tests demonstrated that the vehicle's at-sea hydrodynamic performance, which included submerged operations using all of its different propulsion systems, actually worked. So the prototype works. And while the U.S. Navy has not disclosed specific roles for the Manta Ray project, its capabilities, like we mentioned, mapping, mine detection, long-duration surveillance, and it could serve as a mothership to the smaller underwater drones. So a few other things about the DARPA program. They actually selected 3 different contractors for the Manta Ray program. So Northrop Grumman, Martin Defense Group, and Metron Inc., which dropped out in late 2021. So they wanted to see who could build the best one in their own different ways. And I guess Northrop won out, essentially. But there's others that are still developing their prototypes. So I thought this was a unique point where just because you get the contract doesn't mean somebody else doesn't also get one. So you're in competition to create the best prototype, I guess. And the last point about this Manta Ray project, in January of 2023, Russia actually announced that it had produced a long-range submarine drone dubbed Poseidon, and it looks much like a torpedo, but it's powered by nuclear energy, and it's capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. So not as pretty as the Manta Ray, but Russia is trying to develop weapons as well.
It's like Metal Gear Solid or something.
Yeah.
Nuclear drones? What are we talking about?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Stuff. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is slaughter bots. So it's not the official name of the DARPA projects, but it's kind of this name that's been given just by us.
It's a great band name.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Super metal.
Yeah. But DARPA, they have over 800 active military AI projects in development, and some of them are this fast, lightweight autonomy program. They're a part of that. It's the FLA program. And the FLA program focuses on developing small autonomous drones capable of navigating complex environments without human control or GPS guidance. I thought that was pretty cool. So these drones have demonstrated the ability to fly through woodlands, maneuver around obstacles and enclosed spaces, and return to their starting point independently.
Like a Zumba.
Yeah.
Vacuum, robot vacuum, but it'll kill you.
Yeah, let it clean up the area real quick. God.
They also have this other program called the MAST program, and it stands for Micro Autonomous Systems and Technology. So it officially ended in 2017, but the MAST program made significant strides in miniaturizing autonomous robots for military use specifically. So it created palm-sized spy drones. It developed pocket-sized battlefield scouts that can hop or crawl. So these beetles that just collect information and you don't even notice them because they look like
part of the environment.
Yeah, part of the environment.
So they're not even using biohybrids. They're just using nuts and bolts beetles as drones.
Yeah, essentially, but just like very small, realistic drones. They also have this DSYST program, which stands for Distributed and Collaborative Intelligence Systems and Technology. So building on that mass network of the micro-autonomous systems, the DSYST program aims to make autonomous robots cooperate in swarms. So the goals include enabling coordinated action among multiple autonomous devices and achieving joint objectives through swarm behavior. So think of those moths that you were talking about. Well, getting them all together to just attack an enemy. Or if they had micro bees, they would just... I saw a video of one of the slaughter bots. It just finds its target and then flies at extremely fast speeds, and it just embeds itself into the skull of somebody to kill them.
Oh, God.
But you have a swarm of these things.
It's the projectile. No gun.
Yeah.
You just got a bullet that'll go with pinpoint accuracy exactly where it needs to go. You don't even have to fire a gun. It's crazy.
And then the other program is the REMA program, which stands for Rapid Experimental Missionized Autonomy, and it represents the latest efforts to enhance drone capabilities. So developing a universal system to equip existing commercial and military drones with autonomous capabilities. So you would enable drones to complete missions autonomously, even when connection to human operation is lost. And it also creates creating an autonomy adapter compatible with all commercial drones, regardless of the manufacturer. So what you're doing is you're developing easily uploadable mission-specific autonomy software. So if they wanted to, they could take the drone that you have at home, attach some weapons to it, install a software that would allow it to communicate with other programs, and then it has a new unit essentially.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting that they could just militarize commercial drones easily.
Again, we don't need to create a new gun. We just need to take this gun that already works and change it a little bit.
Yeah.
We don't need to make a million drones if we can just hijack and make a bunch of privately owned drones act and swarm.
Yeah.
That's nuts. That's nuts.
That is wild.
And regardless of the manufacturer too. So collaboration as well.
Gotta encrypt your drones, folks.
VPN on that.
Yeah, get a VPN for your drone. Express VPN for your drone.
Yeah. That's a whole business.
That's a great business.
Don't discount that. That's a whole business now.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on was the AI programs. So their AI Forward initiative aims to explore new directions in AI research, so focusing on developing trustworthy systems for national security applications. And the initiative has received significant funding, and it seems like their 2025 budget request includes $310 million for this specific program. Just their AI stuff. And one of the programs that I thought was really fascinating was the Scepter program. So Scepter aims to develop AI technology to simplify the complexities of modern warfare and speed up real-time combat decisions. So the program combines expert human knowledge with AI's computational power to improve military simulations and strategy development. So essentially what they would do is they're constantly running simulations in the world of how a war scenario would turn out. So they're using expert human knowledge along with this AI system that just simulates it 24/7, and then they're always ready for whatever scenario might happen. So essentially they're able to plan and maybe prepare for World War III without it actually even occurring, because they're constantly running simulations on different scenarios, and then they're creating plans based on those simulations. And then the last program is the GUARD program, which stands for Guaranteeing AI Robustness Against Deception. So it focuses on developing defenses against adversarial attacks on AI systems. So essentially, AI combating AI, which is all the rage. Yeah, the totally. Good AI versus the bad AI.
Yeah, man. That's where it's going.
Let's see.
I know, this is crazy. I mean, we've brought up so many different things. I'm quite shocked. I'm actually more horrified after we even put the notes together, and after going through it, it's more shocking than having done the research for some reason. Talking about it out loud and going through it, it's quite wild.
Yeah, and I'm sure like each one of these sections could be an episode on its own. There's just so much information out there.
And like we're in terms of like the projects we've touched on, we're not even fucking scratching the surface. Like we picked some cool ones like that are definitely amalgamations of decades worth of programs that have coagulated into what they are now. But it's I read through this, and just as we're like speaking it, I guess it doesn't really have an impact until you're like saying the words.
There's something about discourse that really drives a message home. It's very interesting.
So what are your guys' thoughts here? Like after,
Absolutely.
I don't know how much you had known about any of these things or DARPA, but like as you were doing this research and as we've read through this, like we've had some time to gestate this information. What are your guys' thoughts here?
Oh, there's so many. So to answer the first question, obviously everybody's aware of DARPA. We've heard the name. You see things blow up in the media. So for instance, Boston Dynamics, usually when they drop something, everybody kind of knows about it because a robot doing a backflip is pretty badass, and that's very viral.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've listened to the Joe Rogan podcast quite a bit, so I've seen Annie Jacobson talk about this stuff before, at least those 3 examples. But most of this stuff, I had no idea about the extent of it until I actually looked into it. So, I didn't know that there was cyborg turtles, a cyborg jellyfish, and that this is an active field, not only for DARPA, but for science in general. This is an actual field. How can we manipulate other organisms with robotics? And the microorganism stuff blew me away. I didn't, there's nanotechnology being explored as well, but I didn't know the extent to this. And it clearly seems to me after going through everything, where it's a slow movement towards integration with humans. And in the wake of Neuralink and other companies that are doing such things,
the popularization,
it seems in the next decade or sooner, this could be the general trend for many things. And I wonder, my one thought I have is, anytime that there's something like this that comes up, there's always the possibility of it being hijacked, like we were talking about. But then there's also defense against it. So say you have a computer and you put antivirus software on it to defend it. I'm wondering if in the future we're going to have some kind of encryption system for our genetically engineered neurons that if someone tries to hijack, we can still use our cell phones with it and turn on my toaster and know the heat in my house with my brain. But if someone's trying to hijack it, there's some very interesting biohybrid solution to it with like xenobots that protect you from signals or something, and that'll be your antivirus software, but it'll just be like biological in nature. And that seems very wild, but ultimately plausible based on everything we've discussed if it's taken to its logical conclusion.
Absolutely. You know, these I've been looking into the black world and black programs for since I was like 12 years old. I was fascinated by space planes, and that just got me familiarized with the big contractors, and then looking into the other things that they do. I've been looking and digging down paths for a very, very long time. And this is the reality. Yes. Will we need to buy antivirus software for our brains? Yes. Based on what I've seen and what I'm seeing now in society, and we're not, like, everyone wants to talk about unplugging. We're not fucking unplugging. No one's giving up the internet. No one's giving up their cell phone. We're just going further, and that comes with its own set of pros and cons, as we've discussed here. But that will be the strange scenario that we find ourselves in. There's two reasons why any company or even the military wants to develop this shit, is to weaponize it and then to use it in the medical field, because those are the two fields that will make the most money. Any company that's vying for this contract is hoping that they develop a patent that they can at some point sell to medical or military. And this is the trend of shit. Shit's getting smaller, and it's getting more integrated with humanity. The biohybrids, that's the step. The biologic entity that is performing as a robot, that is the step, and we're there. We're already at that point now. So I don't know, Izzo, what do you make of all this shit?
I think it's just very scary that a company like this or an organization like this exists, where they have so much power, and just like the whole setup of it as well. So it's like a private organization, so they don't need disclosure. They can just keep everything behind a curtain and just keep operating the way they do. And because governments are so invested in it, it's like they have unlimited funding to just go crazy with it, essentially. But I do think, I find it just very, very scary. And even like from the beginning, in like the 1960s, like the Agent Orange stuff, they're finding loopholes, how to get away with war crimes and stuff like that. And it's because they have the power of the government behind them, unlimited funding, and like the leading researchers in every field doing this stuff. So, and then it's always crazy to think this is the information that we know. So all the information that we don't know is even scarier. So we've talked about some scary things, but what we don't know is beyond what we can even think of right now. And we won't get to experience it for another 20, 30 years.
You know, I still think it's really funny too, because, you know, DARPA kind of starts as this thing to defend us from nuclear war, the threat of nuclear war, the emerging threats of a new type of war. And that still kind of is the main threat to humanity. Like, even as we're talking about nanobots and biohybrids and all of these autonomous vehicles, they're still not the threat to like ending human life.
Right.
The nuke is still the threat, and some of these platforms are made to increase the time that we respond to that, or deliver nuclear payloads in a more expedient way. I'm sure you guys have gone down the rabbit hole of like hypersonic, the whole trend in hypersonic missiles.
I'm aware a little bit with that, not extensively.
So Russia has been saying they're developing or have developed. I think China said they're developing, but that's in terms of nuclear payloads, that's the new wave. Everyone's trying to develop a way for you to deliver a nuke hypersonically. You know, I breezed over this part in the notes, but it's kind of relevant right now. One of DARPA's first tasks was calculating exactly how long it would take an atom bomb to leave the USSR and reach the USA. And, you know, in the 60s, that was 1,600 seconds. So,
Right.
that the it's gotten better, and hypersonics now completely changed that game. So it's, you know, 30 seconds, 20 seconds. I don't know.
It's wild. I don't know. What does that mean for mutually assured destruction? Because it does seem that that's obsolete at this point, right? If hypersonic weapons are so prominent, whoever fires first, they'll destroy the world, but...
Well, everyone is bluffing. Everyone is saying we're developing these things. We'd have to like actually do research on what has been confirmed in that area of research, but that is like the new thing where once everybody's on that tip, then we've reached stasis in mutually assured destruction, you know.
Yeah,
but until that point, if somebody beats us to it or we beat somebody to it, we create this very like Cold War nuclear standoff tension that, you know, we have seen a lot in our lifetime. But
well, that's true as well. One other thought I had that was more, maybe I'll call it an optimistic thought, just while we're kind of doing our final thoughts here. I'm wondering, usually when like we were talking about this duality between pros and cons of things throughout the podcast, a lot of times these technologies that progress, they're scary initially, but ultimately the standard of living for humans goes up. So for instance, the biohybrid stuff, we were talking, people might not be blind anymore, there might not be auditory loss, there might not be spinal cord injuries through these types of technologies. Do we think that this is ultimately going to help society, or do we think that this will get us to a point where our weapons are so out of control that we lose control, basically? I guess that's my thought. I don't know where we are. Is this ultimately going to be better for us, and we're kind of we're doomers right now, scared of everything, or is this actually crazy and going to cause a lot of damage?
Just like with the internet and social media, we're the experiment. And with a lot of the technology that we've discussed today, on top of all the other shit we didn't discuss, this is just the pros and the cons. In the same way that, like, yeah, if we could find a way to, like, mesh with technology and make humans more efficient, I can see that being very beneficial to all the medical reasons we stated, but even from just a biomonitoring perspective, you could tell if someone's having a heart attack. You know, it would automatically call the ambulance. You know, like there's
the good Slaughterbot comes.
There's right,
brings you to the hospital.
This is just it's just the strange pro and con. What's great, we're doing this right now. You guys are in Canada, I'm in the US. We're having this awesome zero latency conversation. That's an insane pro. Then you have the cons of like all the people that use the internet for shittery, and you know, that unfortunately that is the era that we are going to occupy, and we're really at this, and going through this shit has only reaffirmed this in my mind. We are at the precipice of the singularity. Like us creating a computer with the computational ability of a brain, or being able to successfully mesh technology and biologic humanity and teach you how to be a sniper in 30 minutes, teach you how to be an expert piano player in 30 minutes, you know, Matrix shit.
Yeah.
I want to learn karate. Boom, downloaded. It's just pros and cons. I would love that ability. What I wouldn't like is McDonald's fucking piping ads into my dreams. That's what I wouldn't like. And ultimately, I feel like that's going to be a factor. You know?
If this became, let's just futurize for a second. If all of a sudden we have these implants or these biological implants, that will totally be a thing because universal basic income will become a thing, and the only way you'll get paid is like, I gotta go through 50 McDonald's ads today and I could get my paycheck. Like, that'll be how you get paid, is how much you're exposed to different persuasive techniques. Marketing, it'll be crazy.
Well, and even on a low level, like, we're there. Like, why do you think all the
streaming
social media,
services,
that's the subscription is that whole fucking thing is one thing, but like, even just with all the social media, You can sign up for free. You know why? Because they're selling your data. That's why it's free. It's not.
Yes.
You think it's free, but it's not. They're selling your fucking data, and ultimately, that will absolutely be a component. Yeah, you can be connected to the internet with a chip interface. Sure, no problem. Except for the fact that now they can pipe whatever they want to pipe in there. And again, even if they're not using it for nefarious shit, even if they're just trying to sell you stuff, it's like we can turn a TV off now.
Yeah.
Right? We could, if we don't like what we're watching, we can change the channel. When the shit is in our brain, we don't really have a choice.
That's the thing. It ultimately seems like the duality is going to skew more to con, in the sense that, like, we're talking about perceptions. If my perception can be altered, I'm severed from truth. I can't use my senses to identify what is true around me anymore. And that seems to be, for the individual at least, a huge con. Because at the point we're talking about, that would be like a midpoint where you're getting beamed marketing ads and you're receiving some benefit. But at some point, the marketing ads are to alter your behavior in some way. They're to persuade you to buy McDonald's. But if I can just make you buy McDonald's, I don't need the ad anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? So it seems to me at some point the tech, maybe the duality, maybe we are rushing into something. Maybe doomerism is the correct take on this type of stuff. I don't know.
We're the experiment.
Yeah.
Again, like we didn't necessarily know that social media and the internet and giving it to kids was going to spike depression. We didn't know that. We were the experiment. You know,
that's true.
We're treading into territory that no one's ever been, at least that we know of. Nobody has ever been, and you know this is the strange territory that we occupy now. Like it's an experiment. It will be an experiment. You know, there's a lot of really cool pros here, but you know, like you said, are we going to have antivirus shit for our brain?
Well, that makes me skew towards the pro a little bit, right? Because if I could have all these abilities, I just want to learn I just want to be able to do drums all of a sudden and play drums, and I could just have that ability. But I have the systems designed in such a way that you can't hijack my perceptions, but I can just have my motor system all of a sudden know how to do sick beats or something. That would be a huge pro. So I think, it is kind of like a Red Queen hypothesis. It's just like, it's a constant evolution between the two forces, basically, constantly canceling one each other out. And maybe that's where we're headed. So maybe it is a pro, if that's the case. If there is counter technology to it, it would be sick.
And you know, like, there's also the piece of me too that, yes, it's horrifying that these people entertain these ideas, but like ultimately a majority of the people who are working on these programs are purely thinking about them in terms of defense or offense, but not in like a sinister way. Like if it gets here, here's what we can do. If we find ourselves in this situation, this is how we would approach it. You know, a lot of these things are we have to do it. We have to do it. Like the experiment. We have to do it. Not only for defense, not only for offense. We have to do these things because we're going to have to utilize. The only way humans are making it much longer is if we do these things with technology. That's the plain and simple fact. Like, we need the computers to calculate the shit that we cannot calculate. We're going to have to mesh continually, get deeper and deeper with our connection to technology if we're going to become an interplanetary species and have, you know, SpaceX transporting shit throughout our galaxy. You know, like if we want to get to these things, we have to, I don't know, like we quickly find ourselves, for me, this quickly points us to the direction of like, are the aliens just us from the future? You know what I mean? Like,
that theory is excellent.
The things that we're talking about right now, we're like knocking on that door, and it's like, let's say we go down this road, good or bad things that happen. We go down this road.
Yeah.
What's humanity like in 100 years?
Yes. Yeah, I think, just dovetailing off what you're saying, it kind of sounds like this is going to be this generation's arms race. It's not necessarily, nuclear weapons are still involved, obviously, but
this is the future.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this generation's arms race. And like you're saying, it's one of those things, the game theory just makes us have to do it. You have to pursue it. And we can't calculate the pros or cons. You have to run it, which is very interesting. It's very interesting. It's like a solemn feeling knowing that, but
well, it's
true.
The same. It's the same shit with nukes.
Yeah,
we had to test the nukes. We had to do that. We'd test nukes, and then so many things came from just us testing nukes and nuclear energy. One of the funny stories I've always laughed at is WD-40. Do you guys know what WD-40 is?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know the origin of WD-40?
No, I have no idea.
So it's supposed that WD-40, and I'm just going to pull this up so I don't sound like a total fucking moron here. Hang on one second. But there's a whole host, and we kind of experienced it a few points throughout the script here, but there's products and things that get designed for these types of programs that don't end up getting used for the program, but the thing is still useful. And whatever company was responsible for developing that thing owns that patent, and then they market it to us. That's how we have all the technology that we have. It was being developed by some military industrial complex person, company, DARPA, and then people decided not to go forward with it for military purposes, but the company still thought that they could make some money off of this. So WD-40, and I'm just going to pull this up. This will be a hilarious little, because this is not like cutting edge technology, but it was in some ways. It was a I'm trying to find it here. So yeah, so this was a thing that was at one point being tested as like a coating on space planes, or maybe an additive to the fuel, but this like black program shit. Yeah. And they came up with this thing in the process of doing that, hence 40. It took 40 different iterations of this formula until they found one that did something. And it didn't do what they wanted it to do, but they saw that it removed rust really well.
That's crazy.
And now this is the thing that you use when you're trying to loosen a rusted
make your door
bolt.
not squeaky or something.
Right. But this was like at one point. This is from a rocket chemical company, okay, which later renamed to the WD-40 company. So this company was developing this thing. They probably had a great military contract. And then the military was like, well, that's not useful to us. You didn't develop something that works for us. So they renamed their company WD-40, and that's how we get WD-40. So the whole reason I'm saying that is because that cannot be understated. Like this shit, the pros of this type of research and this type of experimentation, and this is how we have advanced to the point that we're at. But
was WD-40 worth the slaughter?
Exactly. This also dovetails on another one of my favorite Area 51 stories. All the people, like how Area 51 gets disclosed. I don't know if you're familiar at all.
No,
with that,
I'm not familiar with it.
So for listeners who are unfamiliar with this story as well, effectively, a bunch of people at Area 51 who couldn't say that they worked there, because this was in the early 90s before they disclosed that Area 51 was a real place. They sued the government because a lot of them started getting these crazy cancers and dying. Oh. And in the process of that court case, it comes out that at Area 51, for a while, the best method that they had of getting rid of airframes that they weren't going to use in tested planes that they developed that weren't going into production was you push them into a pit, douse them in jet fuel, and light it on fire. Okay. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if they weren't doing it right outside the buildings at Area 51. So all the scientists that were in those buildings were inhaling jet fuel that was covering all these exotic planes made of all these exotic materials and burning them and then getting cancer and dying. And ultimately through this case is when Bill Clinton officially acknowledges Area 51. So like, you know, that there is a cost to this. Like none of this shit is free and clear. None of it is totally free of some kind of weird, horrible scenario, you know?
So the moral of the story there is you have to get a lawsuit or litigation started to get disclosure for anything. So it makes me wonder, these Canadians suing our government right now for this Havana syndrome, does something come from that court case that gets disclosed and that's how it's made public?
Very well could.
Very interesting.
That might be the only way anything like that gets disclosed. Because once you have the legal processes going, there's different rules that, you know, the state can demand information that just a regular citizen can't. But when you file a lawsuit, you have the state on your behalf, asking for those kinds of disclosures. But I don't know, this whole conversation. I'm gonna need like another stiff drink.
Absolutely.
Once we're done here.
I have one quick swerve thought I was thinking.
Let's do it.
While we're in the end here. The one thought I was having, because we were talking about disclosure quickly, and we mentioned the singularity, and we did bring up some UFO stuff sporadically. I'm wondering, this is pure swerve thought, completely speculative, but do you know the common trope that UFOs, they focus around nuclear bases? There's a lot of sightings around nuclear bases, and it kind of seems around the time of when the nukes were dropped, the whole Foo Fighter phenomenon, sightings like this is when UFOs started being sighted more and more frequently. So it seems, I'm setting this up for another thought, but from that thought, we could assume if there are these UFOs coming and going, it seems that they're very interested in nukes and potentially us ending everything and our technology. So I'm wondering if we get to the point of a singularity and we have these hyper intelligent beings we've created artificially, is this when we see disclosure, if it does exist, in the same way the UFOs come when nukes are being dropped? And we've now reached this second paradigm in technology where there is a hyper-intelligent being that we generated that could compete with these other advanced civilizations. Is this when we see disclosure? And then maybe this is where DARPA is pushing us towards in some bizarre way. It's crazy. Crazy thought, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
To me, not so weird. And even, again, like, there's the whole thread that a lot of the technology that got them to doing these things in the 50s and 60s was harvested from some crash or, some exotic technology that was discovered. But that to me is completely plausible.
I would just find that hilarious.
What are your thoughts on that, Izzo?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what both of you have said. Where, I don't know. I agree. My mind is just kind of blown.
It hurts. It really hurts. Like, honestly, I hope we didn't depress everybody, but no, I thought that this was a very realistic and sobering introduction into any of these topics, and I really hope that if we don't leave any depression on the listeners, that we kind of just inspire people to look into some of these. If there's one of these things that interested you, you're totally right. Every one of these things could have been its own episode, a long, deeply researched episode.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we have been doing this for 3 hours. Let's wrap it up here. Magnum, Izzo, thank you guys so much for joining me again on this.
Thanks for having us. I really appreciate it. This was fun. I hope your audience enjoyed this topic. It was a blast.
It doesn't even matter if they enjoyed it because I had a blast. This was great. I think they will too. And again, to the listeners, like, please go check out the Swerve Podcast. It is the best researched shit out there. Listening to a lot of podcasts on a lot of these subjects, there's some of your episodes are the most detail I've heard anyone go into.
I appreciate that.
Good detail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything you want to leave the folks with?
I don't know. Keep an open mind. Keep an open mind. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
That's my final thought.
Question everything is what I would say as well.
And as we always say on our podcast, slap that ass.
And ride the wave.
Hell yeah, I love that. Well, all right, guys, this has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this journey. And we'll catch y'all on the next one. See you laters.
Peace.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.